Welcome to part one of a highly anticipated four-part mini-series right here on the Deep Dive.
Yeah, I am so ready for this.
I mean, we are starting what is essentially an intense, highly dopaminergic sprint through a text that it fundamentally altered my understanding of human behavior, period.
It really rewires how you see the world.
Totally. The book is Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman, Richard Boyatzis, and Annie McKee. And for this specific conversation today, our mission is strictly to unpack the introduction right through to the end of Chapter 3.
Right, which focuses entirely on the neuroanatomy of leadership.
Exactly. We are diving into the raw biology of how human beings influence one another.
And I think it is crucial to set the framing correctly right from the start here. We are not doing a dry review of standard business principles or corporate strategy.
No, absolutely not.
We are taking a visceral, deeply physiological journey into the raw wiring of the human brain. I want you, listening to this, to conceptualize the brain not as a static textbook diagram.
Right, not a 2D drawing.
Exactly. Think of it as a dynamic, three-dimensional topographical landscape. Picture this glowing mountain of electrical signals, neurotransmitter cascades, ancient survival pathways just constantly reacting to the environment, like a sparking factory assembly line.
A biological factory, yeah.
Right. We are examining the actual biological reality of how a leader's mood literally alters the cellular chemistry of the people around them.
It is wild to think about. I mean, have you ever considered why certain leaders or managers, why they possess the ability to make a team feel incredibly energized? Like you're ready to run through brick walls for them?
Yeah, the ones who just electrify the room.
Exactly. While others who might possess identical technical qualifications, right, they say all the correct corporate phrases, but they somehow just drain the cognitive oxygen from the room.
They suck the life right out of it.
It's not a matter of some abstract personality trait. It is a literal matter of neurochemistry.
It's biological.
It really is. So to you listening, whether you are managing a massive corporate division or maybe prepping for a difficult negotiation, or you're just intensely curious about why your team's collective mood fluctuates so wildly like an emotional soupanor, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you interpret human interaction.
It changes everything.
So we need to begin with a very specific case study from the BBC. It illustrates the concept of the primal force of leadership just perfectly.
Yeah, the BBC scenario is the absolute ideal entry point because it demonstrates the delivery of severe news.
Right.
And that is a situation that immediately triggers the brain's threat detection circuitry. So the BBC had established this specific news division as an experimental venture. We were talking about 200 highly trained journalists and editors.
Heavy hitters, people who had invested massive amounts of time and intellectual energy into this project.
Exactly. But despite their dedication, upper management deemed the experiment financially unviable.
Yeah, the money wasn't there.
Right, so they decided to shut the entire division down.
Yeah.
200 people were facing immediate job loss.
And upper management sends an executive, we'll just call him Executive 1, to deliver the news.
A terrible idea.
Awful. The psychological environment in that room is already a total tinderbox. You've got 200 anxious, defensive journalists.
Waiting for the axe to fall.
Right. So Executive 1 takes the podium, and his approach is aggressively defensive. He delivers the news brusquely, but the detail that really stands out, the part that is just mind-blowing, is that he actually begins pontificating about a recent trip he took to Cannes.
It's almost unbelievable.
He is standing before 200 people whose livelihoods are literally evaporating, and he references the French Riviera.
From a neurobiological standpoint, it is a catastrophic failure of leadership. I mean, the news in the division closing was objectively terrible, yes. But the executive's complete lack of attunement to the room's emotional reality incited a specific physiological reaction.
He threw gasoline on the fire.
He really did. He didn't just cause frustration. He triggered a massive release of cortisol and adrenaline across 200 separate nervous systems all at once.
A synchronized panic attack.
Exactly. The atmosphere became so hostile, so physically threatening, that it actually appeared the executive would require a security detail just to safely exit the building.
Because they wanted to tear him apart.
Right. The crowd was pushed into a collective, primal fight-or-flight state.
But the narrative does not end there, which is why I love this example. The very next day, a second executive arrives to address the exact same staff.
Executive 2.
Executor 2. Now, He is dealing with the identical objective reality. The division is still closing, the jobs are still gone, nothing has changed on paper.
Right.
However, his approach is entirely different. He discards the corporate script entirely. He speaks from the heart about the intrinsic calling of journalism. He discusses the difficult macroeconomic realities of the industry, sure, but he validates the shared passion and the integrity of the work they
He
produce.
connects with them.
And the result. He finishes speaking to a room full of people who have literally just been terminated, and they give him a standing ovation.
It's an incredible pivot, and it highlights the profound difference between dissonance and resonance. Executive 1 generated severe dissonance. Executive 2 generated profound resonance.
Let me challenge that for just a second, though, because a standing ovation for the person confirming you are unemployed, it almost sounds like psychological manipulation, doesn't it? How do the authors differentiate between a truly resonant leader and just a highly charismatic manipulator who knows how to play a crowd's emotions?
That is a critical distinction, and it's a great question. It really comes down to the root definition of the word resonance itself. It derives from the Latin resonare, which means synchronous vibration.
Synchronous vibration.
Right. True resonance requires absolute authenticity. Think of two tuning forks. One vibrates and the other catches the exact same frequency. A manipulator fakes a frequency to achieve a self-serving outcome.
Like putting on a mask.
Exactly. But eventually, that creates cognitive dissonance when their actions don't match their words. The tuning forks clash. Executive 2, however, authentically attuned to the genuine grief, the fear, and the pride present in that room. He synchronized with their actual emotional state rather than trying to paste over it with fake cheer.
So he met them where they actually were physiologically.
Yes. By acknowledging the pain and tying it to their shared values, he prolonged a positive emotional pitch, even amidst a tragedy.
So Executive 1 was just completely out of sync.
Entirely out of sync. Dissonance is the absence of synchronous vibration. It is neurological static. It creates this downward negative spiral. Executive 1 was just completely oblivious to the limbic state of his audience.
And because of that, he sent these needlessly threatening signals.
Right. And when a leader creates that level of dissonance, the collective distress of the room becomes the sole preoccupation of the group.
They literally can't think of anything else.
They cannot. The group cannot process complex information, strategy, or logic because their brains are entirely consumed by the physiological stress response that the leader just initiated.
Which brings us to the core biological mechanism driving all of this. This is the part that just blew my mind. Why are 200 highly intelligent journalists so susceptible to the mood of one single executive?
It's the architecture of the brain.
Why can one person's poor delivery hijack the nervous systems of an entire room? The text points to the reality that the human limbic system, our emotional processing center, is an open-loop system.
Yes, this is the absolute foundation of the neuroanatomy of leadership. To grasp the implications of an open-loop system, we have to contrast it with a closed-loop system.
Like the circulatory system.
Perfect example. The human circulatory system is self-regulating. It's a closed loop. If we are standing next to each other right now and you suffer a paper cut, my blood pressure does not automatically drop to compensate.
Thank goodness.
Right. My cardiovascular system operates completely independently of yours. It manages itself.
And the limbic system does not do that.
Correct. The limbic system is evolutionarily designed to remain open. It relies extensively on external sources to regulate itself. And specifically, it relies on the emotional states of other human beings to regulate its own neurochemistry.
Like invisible emotional Wi-Fi.
Exactly like Wi-Fi. We are biologically wired to act as external regulators for each other's physiology.
We are constantly transmitting, constantly searching for a signal, attempting to pair with the nervous systems of the people in our proximity. And the sources provide compelling physiological data to support this. I mean, this is not merely a poetic metaphor about feeling the room.
No, it is hard science.
Right. For example, the text talks about when married couples experience a positive, supportive interaction, it triggers measurable surges of oxytocin in each other's brains. They are chemically altering one another through mere proximity and attention.
The clinical data reinforces this heavily across multiple environments. Think about the intensive care units. Researchers observing ICUs discovered that the simple, comforting presence of another person in the room has a profound, measurable physiological impact on the patient.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting there. It not only lowers the patient's blood pressure, but it significantly slows the secretion of fatty acids that block arteries.
Wow.
The physical presence of a resident human being functions as a literal biological shield against the ravages of stress. Conversely, prolonged social isolation triples the death rate in middle-aged men who experience intense stress. The open loop is a biological necessity for survival.
And the speed at which this mirroring occurs is just staggering. It's instantaneous. The text references a study where researchers placed 3 strangers in a room, just 3 random people.
I love this study.
They sat them in a circle, facing one another in absolute silence for 2 minutes. That's it. 2 minutes of silence. Within that brief window, the individuals with less naturally expressive faces automatically adopted the precise mood of the most emotionally expressive person in the group,
Without saying a single word.
without a single word exchanged. Their limbic systems paired and synchronized to the dominant emotional frequency in the room.
The scientific term for that phenomenon is entrainment, and you can actually map it. If you monitor the cardiovascular profiles of 2 individuals engaging in a standard 15-minute conversation, you will observe this in real time.
The heart rate sync.
Exactly. Initially, their heart rates operate at independent, distinct rhythms. However, by the conclusion of a successful resonant conversation, if they've really connected, their physiological profiles will literally mirror one another. Their heart rates synchronize. Our bodies literally shift into the physiological register of the person we are engaging with.
Okay, so if we take this concept of entrainment, this open loop mirroring, and we apply it to a corporate environment, the implications are massive.
They are organizational-wide.
A workplace is essentially just a dense network of intersecting open loops. Every person entering the office or joining a video conference is projecting their own neurochemical state into the environment.
Adding to the emotional soup.
Yes, the emotional soup. If a colleague is experiencing acute anxiety, they introduce that frequency. If another just secured a major contract, they project elevation. But the crucial insight from the authors is that the leader is the limiting regent in this environment.
The leader adds the strongest flavor to the soup.
Right. The leader possesses a disproportionate ability to dictate the collective physiological state of the group.
We have to examine why the leader holds that disproportionate power, though. Why does the executive's mood carry more weight than, say, a mid-level manager's or a junior analyst's?
Why are we so obsessed with the boss?
It traces back to fundamental primate survival instincts. In early human tribes, the group's survival depended on constantly monitoring the leader for cues regarding safety or threat.
Right. If the leader looks terrified, we should probably run.
Exactly. Everyone implicitly watches the individual holding power. We inherently take our emotional cues from the top because, from an evolutionary perspective, recognizing the leader's state was critical to anticipating danger.
So in a modern context, if the CEO is pacing aggressively behind a closed glass door on the executive floor, just brooding that localized stress does not stay contained in that office.
Not at all. It leaks out.
It sends a ripple effect of effective contagion through the entire organizational structure. The employees inadvertently absorb and mirror that tension, even if they don't know why.
They do, and it has a measurable impact on cognitive performance and actual financial outcomes. The text cites this highly rigorous study from Yale University, the examined groups tasked with complex executive decisions.
This is the bonus allocation study, right?
Yes. They had these groups determining the allocation of a finite pool of money for yearly bonuses. Now, this requires analytical thinking, fairness, strategic negotiation, high-level cognitive tasks.
Pure math and logic, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
But the researchers covertly manipulated the moods of these groups before the task.
They secretly primed them.
Exactly.
Oh.
The groups that were primed with positive, resonant feelings performed significantly better. They demonstrated higher efficiency, superior collaboration, and ultimately reached more optimal, fair financial decisions.
And the negative groups.
The groups primed with negative emotions experienced measurable cognitive impairment. They fought more, they were less efficient. But the most striking detail of the entire study,
Oh, I know this.
the participants were completely unaware that their moods had been manipulated.
Yes.
And when confronted with it, they vehemently denied that their emotions had influenced their logical reasoning.
They fully believed they were operating on pure objective rationality, while their open loops were secretly dictating their financial mathematics the entire time.
We are so blind to our own biology.
We really are. And if you are wondering who exerts the most influence over that open loop in a standard work environment, the data clearly points to the boss factor.
The boss factor is huge.
There was a comprehensive study of interactions within an international hotel chain. They tracked every single incident that caused an employee's mood to decline: customer disputes, operational failures, personal issues at home. Out of all possible variables, interacting with a boss was the most frequent catalyst for a negative mood state.
9 out of 10 times.
9 out of 10 times, interactions with management left the employee experiencing frustration or anger. The leader is literally holding the primary remote control to the team's limbic regulation.
Which is why a leader's ability to intentionally manage that shared neurochemistry is absolutely paramount. It's not a soft skill, it's biological management.
Yeah.
Interestingly, one of the most effective, immediate tools for regulating this collective state is shared laughter.
Yes, laughter as neural superglue. The marketing VP scenario perfectly illustrates this mechanism. So picture this. Imagine a high-stakes management meeting at a major retailer. The executives are reviewing market research data, and the metrics are just disastrous.
A total nightmare scenario.
Right. The VP of marketing has executed a severely flawed, highly expensive advertising campaign. The tension in the room is palpable. It is thick enough to cut with a knife. The VP is acutely aware of the failure. All the peers are aware, and defensive postures are rapidly forming across the table.
In a dissonant environment, this is the exact moment an amygdala hijack initiates.
Everyone gets ready to fight.
Right. The brain perceives a threat to status and security, and the individuals prepare for conflict. Cortisol floods the system. However, before that physiological cascade can really take hold, another executive in the room breaks the dead silence.
And he quips, "Maybe you just didn't have your glasses on."
And the entire room erupts into laughter.
Why does that specific intervention work so well? How does a single, slightly goofy joke rescue the cognitive function of the entire executive team?
Neurologically speaking, laughter is the shortest distance between two human beings.
I love that phrasing.
It acts as an evolutionary all-clear signal. When a group laughs together, it instantly interlocks and synchronizes their limbic systems.
Brain to brain.
Brain to brain.
Mhm.
And effectively, it resets the vagus nerve, which overrides the amygdala's threat response. The joke functioned on two distinct levels here. First, it implicitly acknowledged the elephant in the room, the marketing chief's massive error. It didn't ignore it.
Right, it wasn't toxic positivity.
Exactly. But second, it profoundly softened the psychological blow. By triggering a shared physiological release, the executive shifted the entire room's neurochemistry into a positive, secure register. It prevented the group from getting bogged down in defensiveness and blame, allowing their prefrontal cortices to remain engaged so they could seamlessly pivot toward a strategic solution.
It totally dispels the biological static.
It clears the air.
But the really fascinating element here is the source of the intervention. The individual who delivered the joke and regulated the room's emotional thermostat was not necessarily the person holding the highest title, correct?
That is correct. And this is a vital distinction. We must differentiate between the official leader and the de facto emotional leader.
Right.
The official leader holds the formal authority, the title, but the emotional leader functions as the group's limbic attractor. The authors utilize the example of a prominent jazz band to explain this.
Yeah, the founder versus the emotional core.
Right. The band operates under the name of its founder. He manages the logistics, he handles the finances, he books the gigs. He is the explicit official authority. However, during a live performance, when the musical direction needs to pivot or the emotional intensity of the set requires a subtle shift, the musicians do not look to the founder.
They look to the magnet.
They do. Their attention naturally gravitates toward a different member, the most dominant, emotionally expressive player on stage. Emotional leadership is dictated by whoever exerts the strongest magnetic pull on the group's open loops, completely irrespective of the organizational hierarchy on paper.
The person with the strongest emotional broadcast signal becomes the primary router that everyone else pairs with.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, we have discussed standard corporate frictions so far: failed ad campaigns, bonus allocations, bad emails. But I want to pivot to something incredibly serious here. How does this neurological framework hold up when the environment experiences a genuine, catastrophic life or death threat?
It gets tested to its absolute limits.
This brings us to a deeply powerful case study from the text involving Mark Lower, who is the CEO of Soundview Technology, during the events of September 11, 2001.
The Soundview narrative is a profound study in extreme resonance during a period of acute, unimaginable crisis. Soundview was a technology brokerage firm located in Connecticut. During the 9/11 attacks, members of the firm lost family members, friends, and close colleagues.
The trauma was immediate and pervasive.
Completely overwhelming. In a moment of sheer existential chaos like that, the human open loop is frantically, desperately searching for a stabilizing signal. The collective nervous system of the organization is essentially crying out, how do we process this? What is our posture supposed to be?
A leader operating from a place of dissonance might attempt to enforce rigid stability in that moment. They might insist on compartmentalizing the grief, urging the team to focus on the markets just to maintain some facade of normalcy.
Which would have been catastrophic biologically.
But Lohr took an entirely different approach.
Hmm.
He did not mandate business as usual. He asked his entire staff to come into the office the following day, not to execute trades, but simply to share physical space.
He brought the open loops together.
Yes. He sat with them and allowed the grief to just be present. Every single evening, he distributed a company-wide email that completely ignored financial metrics. It focused solely on the human toll and the personal reflections of the staff. He asked the employees to compile a memory book of their thoughts, their fears, poetry for future generations.
From a leadership perspective, Lohr was executing one of the most vital functions possible during a crisis. He was managing meaning.
Managing meaning.
Yes. He did not offer hollow optimism. He didn't offer fake cheer or attempt to prematurely rush them past their trauma. He authentically attuned to the agonizing emotional reality of his team. He validated their biological state. But crucially, he did not allow the organization to remain permanently suspended in shared despair.
He found the pivot.
Once he established that deep, resonant connection, he gently guided their collective focus toward a unified, uplifting purpose.
And the pivot he orchestrated is just remarkable. He proposed that the firm donate the entirety of one day's trading proceeds to the victims of the attacks. To provide some financial context here, on an average trading day, Soundview generated roughly $500,000 in revenue.
A solid day.
Their all-time historical record for a single day was approximately $1 million. But because the entire organization was deeply aligned, operating from a state of profound resonance and fueled by a clear, intensely meaningful objective, they engaged their clients with an entirely different level of intensity. In a single day, they generated over $6 million.
It gives you chills.
6 times their all-time record, over $6 million for the victims.
It is a staggering demonstration of how resonance operates as an amplifier. When a leader successfully manages meaning, they can channel collective trauma into an uplifting, shared aspiration. The team did not achieve that massive revenue multiple because of some sudden improvement in financial strategy or trading algorithms. They achieved it because their limbic systems were synchronized in the pursuit of a profound shared purpose. And that optimization of the open loop, optimizing cognitive function, stamina, and resilience.
So we have referenced these biological systems quite a bit now. The open loop, the limbic system, the amygdala. Let's actually look under the hood. Let's examine the actual neuroanatomy inside the brain's factory in greater detail.
Let's do it.
I want you to imagine the human brain as this incredibly complex, highly evolved survival architecture. It is a dense, three-dimensional topographical map of neural pathways. But there is a fundamental evolutionary glitch that modern professionals have to navigate every single day.
The glitch is the source of so much workplace misery.
It really is.
The glitch lies in the severe mismatch between our ancient biological hardware and our modern psychological environment. Our brain evolved over millennia to prioritize immediate physical survival. Our emotional processing centers function as a highly sensitive, rapid response threat detection system.
The 10,000-year-old alarm system.
Exactly. If an early human encountered a saber-toothed tiger, the brain did not allocate time for the prefrontal cortex to mathematically calculate the predator's velocity and trajectory.
You'd be eaten before you finish the math.
Right. Instead, the thalamus routed the sensory data directly to the amygdala, and the amygdala instantly flooded the system with cortisol and adrenaline, initiating an immediate fight or flight response. Run or fight.
Survival.
Survival. The challenge is that today, we are navigating highly nuanced social environments using that exact same ancient architecture.
So we're dealing with complex modern stressors, like receiving a passive-aggressive, annoying email from Steve in accounting. using a system designed for a saber-toothed tiger.
Precisely. Steve sends a message stating, just checking in on the status of this project again, and your biological reaction is indistinguishable from encountering a physical predator in the wild. Your heart rate accelerates, your respiratory rate shifts, your pupils dilate.
The text refers to this specific phenomenon as the amygdala hijack.
Yes, the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is this vital, almond-shaped structure deep within the limbic system. It acts as the brain's primary screaming red alarm. When a dissonant leader publicly undermines an employee or creates an environment of pervasive job insecurity, the amygdala interprets this as a literal threat to physical survival.
It doesn't know the difference between being fired and being eaten.
It does not. It initiates an emergency override. Functional MRI scans demonstrate that during this hijack, the right side of the prefrontal area of the brain exhibits intense high levels of activity. This is the area associated with anxiety, fear, and hyperfixation.
The thinking brain is effectively commandeered by the limbic brain. You literally cannot process information properly. You can't access higher-order cognitive functions like creative problem-solving or complex analytical thinking when your physiology is locked in a state of terror.
You're just trying to survive the meeting.
Exactly. And this explains perfectly why the demagogue style of leadership is fundamentally broken and unsustainable. A manager who relies on fear, who leads through intimidation, they might achieve a short-term spike in productivity because the team is terrified, but they are simultaneously bathing their employees' brains in toxic levels of cortisol.
Right. It induces a state of chronic allostatic load. The constant, unending activation of the stress response system leads to actual biological burnout. The neurons literally begin to fray under the sustained chemical pressure. It destroys long-term capacity.
Okay, so if the amygdala is the screaming red alarm, what is the antidote? What regulates it? The text introduces the absolute hero of the story here, the left prefrontal cortex.
The left prefrontal cortex is the crucial counterbalance. The circuitry connecting the left prefrontal area down to the amygdala serves as the brain's primary regulatory pathway. It is the biological dampener. It is responsible for inhibiting the amygdala's distress signals.
The cheerleader circuit.
Yes. When an individual is in an optimistic, resilient, upbeat state, neuroimaging reveals heightened activity in this exact left prefrontal circuitry. It pumps out steady streams of good feelings and optimistic reminders. It releases neurotransmitters like GABA that actively downregulate the panic response.
It quiets the noise.
It quiets the noise of anxiety, which allows the individual to process setbacks without spiraling into a physiological crisis. A resonant leader heavily utilizes this left prefrontal capacity to manage their own internal state first, and then to broadcast that regulated energy to the entire group.
This leads to one of my favorite visual metaphors in the book. When a frustrated, hijacked employee interacts with a calm, regulated manager, it initiates what the authors call a dance of the amygdalas.
A neural tug-of-war.
Yes. It's a biological tug-of-war. The employee's amygdala is highly active, broadcasting severe distress signals. The manager's left prefrontal cortex is working overtime to dampen that distress. The individual possessing the superior emotional self-management, the one with the pronounced left prefrontal tilt, who remains genuinely upbeat and unflappable, will almost always end up calming the irritable one down.
They win the biological contest.
Right. They literally pull the other person's physiology into their own regulated orbit. But that demands significant emotional labor.
It takes immense practice and self-control.
Which brings up this incredible historical tangent in the text. The authors highlight a fascinating cultural manifestation of this exact neurobiological process by exploring the origins of the word cool.
I was hoping we would talk about this.
Right.
The origin of cool is profound.
Let's unpack that, because it's not just about wearing sunglasses indoors.
No, not at all. The modern conceptualization of being cool actually originated within the community of African-American jazz musicians. These artists were operating during an era defined by intense systemic racism and daily profound indignities. The constant threats to their physical and psychological safety would entirely justifiably trigger massive amygdala responses.
Yeah.
Deep rage, righteous anger, intense fear.
Constant biological alarm.
Exactly.
Right.
However, to survive that environment and to perform at the absolute pinnacle of creative musical genius, they cultivated an extraordinary capacity for emotional self-management. They mastered the ability to regulate that intense autonomic arousal.
They didn't just push it down or suppress it?
No, suppression doesn't work biologically. Rather, They utilized supreme left prefrontal control to channel that intense, turbulent, enraged energy into deep, powerful musical expression. The ability to manage that internal fire while outwardly projecting mastery, artistry, and absolute unflappable composure, that was the original definition of cool.
Wow.
It represents the absolute apex of emotional self-management.
Being cool is essentially possessing a left prefrontal cortex made of titanium.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, so having mapped this neuroanatomy, we've got the amygdala's threat detection, the left prefrontal cortex's regulation, and the open loop transmission between people. We can now look at the actual blueprint the authors provide for developing these capacities. They structure this into the 4 domains, or 4 pillars, of emotional intelligence, or EI.
Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management.
Right. Let's rapidly fire through these, starting with pillar 1, self-awareness. And specifically, I want to talk about the role of the basal ganglia, because this section fundamentally blew my mind and redefined the concept of going with your gut.
The neuroscience underpinning human intuition is remarkable, and it is so often completely misunderstood in business.
People treat it like magic.
They do, but it's biology. Deep within the primitive regions of the brain, situated right above the spinal cord, is the basal ganglia. Every single day of your career, throughout every professional interaction, the basal ganglia is silently extracting data. It acts as an incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition engine,
It's just taking notes in the background.
constantly cataloging decision rules and cause and effect sequences from your experiences. It implicitly learns that, for example, when a negotiation takes a specific tonal shift, the deal is likely to fail, even if you consciously cannot articulate why.
But the major limitation, and this is the crazy part, is that the basal ganglia operates entirely independently of the neocortex. It has zero connection to the verbal part of your brain.
It cannot speak English.
It has no capacity for language whatsoever. It cannot present you with a logical written report of its pattern analysis.
So how does it talk to you?
Right.
To transmit this vast reservoir of accumulated life wisdom, it utilizes the emotional circuitry. Specifically, it routes signals through the amygdala and then sends a massive data dump down the vagus nerve directly into the enteric nervous system.
Which governs the gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah.
So a gut feeling is a literal, physical, physiological event.
It is a massive nonverbal data loop. When you are faced with a complex decision and your basal ganglia recognizes a historical pattern, it alters the physiological state of your stomach. The somatic markers, the sudden tightening of the gut, that wave of unease, those are your biological archives informing you that a situation aligns with past successes or past failures.
That is insane.
Self-awareness, in this context, is the refined ability to tune into that somatic data, to actually listen to the gastrointestinal signal, and then to synthesize it with your cognitive reasoning.
But I have to ask, is the gut always right? Because if I have a deep-seated unconscious bias against a certain type of project, my basal ganglia might give me a stomachache, but that doesn't mean the project is objectively bad. It just means my pattern recognition is flawed.
And that is exactly why self-awareness is only the first pillar. It's not the final answer. The basal ganglia provides the raw data based on past exposure, but it requires the prefrontal cortex to interrogate that data. If your gut signals danger, self-awareness is pausing to ask, wait, is this a genuine strategic risk? Or am I just reacting to an implicit bias or a trauma from my last job?
Which transitions us perfectly into pillar 2, self-management. If self-awareness is reading the data from your gut, self-management is deciding how you're going to respond to it.
Right.
We discussed the dance of the amygdalas earlier. Self-management is that constant inner conversation that frees us from being prisoners of our own panic. If a leader attempts to govern relying solely on their intellect, completely bypassing the biological reality of their own team, the results are disastrous. And the text provides the ultimate example of a clueless CEO who failed to grasp this.
It is a stark illustration of the limits of pure cognitive intelligence. IQ is not enough. This particular executive assumed leadership of a massive global corporation, and he immediately initiated a radical, sweeping shift in strategy.
He wanted to change everything on day one.
Right. Now, his intellectual capability was unquestionable. The strategy itself may have been logically perfectly sound on paper. However, he attempted to execute this massive organizational pivot purely through intellectual dictates. He fundamentally ignored the limbic system of his organization.
He just sent out memos.
Memos and spreadsheets. He made no effort to secure emotional buy-in. He didn't manage the severe anxiety the transition was generating. He completely failed to regulate the collective open loop.
He treated the organization like a closed-loop computer algorithm rather than an open-loop biological network. And the physiological reaction was immediate.
He triggered a company-wide amygdala hijack.
The board of directors was suddenly inundated with furious, resentful emails from all over the globe regarding his detached, dictatorial style. He was terminated within 1 year, fired in 12 months. He possessed massive cognitive processing power, but he completely lacked the self-management to regulate his own hubris, and he failed to manage the effective climate of his organization.
Which naturally progresses to Pillar 3, social awareness. And specifically within that, the capacity for empathy. Now, empathy is frequently misunderstood in corporate settings as mere agreeableness or being nice.
Being soft.
Exactly. But in the context of primal leadership, empathy is a highly calibrated biological radar system. We previously mentioned the neurons located in and around the amygdala that are specialized for reading facial expressions and vocal intonations.
The mirror neuron system.
Yes. When a socially aware leader addresses a group, their neural circuitry is continuously processing microexpressions, posture shifts, tonal variations in the room. They are receiving a constant stream of internal somatic bulletins.
Like little pop-up notifications in their brain. He's bored. She likes this idea. They're getting angry.
Precisely. They possess a continuous, real-time feedback loop regarding the neurochemical state of the room. A resonant leader utilizes that telemetric data to constantly fine-tune their approach on the fly. If they sense the collective amygdala response rising, they instinctively pivot. They alter their cadence, they soften their delivery, or maybe they deploy a joke to reset the vagal tone like we talked about earlier.
And a dissonant leader.
A dissonant leader, completely lacking this radar, simply continues to read off the teleprompter while the room's physiological state deteriorates into chaos.
Which brings us to the culmination of the entire framework. Pillar 4, relationship management. This domain synthesizes the previous 3. Once a leader possesses the self-awareness to interpret their internal gut signals, the self-management to regulate their own amygdala, and the social awareness to accurately read the room's frequency, then, and only then, do they possess the capacity to genuinely move human beings.
That's when you can drive outcomes at scale.
Right. You become the ultimate left prefrontal anchor for the group. And the authors point to a transcendent historical example of resonant goal setting to illustrate this. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech.
The perfect example.
He did not step up to the podium and outline a highly tactical 10-point legislative strategy with bullet points. He articulated a vivid, deeply hopeful vision that tapped directly into the core shared values of his audience. He engaged their highest aspirations, and he synchronized the open loops of millions of individuals around a common, deeply resonant objective.
It represents the absolute pinnacle of inspirational, resonant leadership. However, it's important to note that this neurobiological framework is equally applicable on a micro scale. It's not just for historic speeches.
Right, what about the everyday manager?
The text details a corporate product director who operated without any formal authority whatsoever. He had no direct reports. He had no institutional power to mandate compliance from anyone. He essentially referred to himself as a company of one.
So how does a company of one get anything done? How do you lead without formal authority?
Through masterful relationship management, he understood that he could not dictate action. He couldn't just order people around. But he realized he could influence them by attuning to their specific agendas and their emotional drivers. He utilized his social awareness to understand what actually mattered to them. And then he used his relationship management to align his project's goals with their internal motivations.
I can't tell you what to do, but I can convince you by appealing to your agenda.
Exactly. He led entirely through resonance and influence, completely bypassing the need for command and control mechanics.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of neurobiological terrain today.
A dopaminergic sprint indeed.
From the concept of the limbic system operating as an invisible emotional Wi-Fi via the open loop, meaning we are literally biologically wired to regulate each other's physiological states, to the basal ganglia sending massive nonverbal data dumps down the vagus nerve to give us gut feelings. We've examined the amygdala hijack, the all-important left prefrontal regulation, the origin of cool, and the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence.
That's a lot to process.
It is, but the takeaway is clear. Leadership is demonstrably not just about a spreadsheet or a strategic plan. It is the literal neurochemical manipulation of the collective emotional soup.
The biological implications really are profound. and they should completely alter how you approach your daily professional interactions. I encourage everyone listening to critically observe their own work environment tomorrow. When you walk into a meeting, look around. Identify the individual acting as the emotional magnet. Who is dictating the physiological state of the room?
Who holds the remote control?
Exactly. And more importantly, when you contribute to that environment, what specific flavor are you adding to the emotional soup? Are your unresolved anxieties sparking a collective hijack? Or are you operating with sufficient self-management to serve as the regulating left prefrontal anchor for your team?
It requires a profound level of responsibility once you realize you are a biological broadcaster. You can't unsee it. And to leave you with one final provocative thought to process something to really chew on that builds entirely upon this text but applies it to our current reality.
Oh, this is the big question.
If the human limbic system is an open loop, literally designed by evolution over millions of years to constantly rewrite and regulate each other's physiology through physical presence, through eye contact and shared laughter, what happens to our neural wiring in an increasingly remote world?
It's a scary thought.
When we spend more of our time interacting through flat two-dimensional screens, dealing with algorithms and AI, rather than with resonant, breathing human leaders in physical space, does our collective emotional Wi-Fi signal begin to degrade? Are we starving our open loops? It's the grand experiment we're all living through right now.
It really is. Something heavy to chew on until episode 2. Thank you so much for joining us for this first leg of the mini-series on the deep dive. We've got a lot more ground to cover, and we are thrilled to have you with us. See you next time.
Welcome back. We are diving right back in, picking up the exact thread where we left off.
Right into it.
Exactly. This is part 2 of our 4-part deep dive mini-series into the groundbreaking framework of the source material, Primal Leadership.
And if you were with us for part 1, you know we lead some pretty heavy foundational groundwork.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about that profound, undeniable reality that leadership is, at its absolute core, an emotional task.
Right.
We explored how emotions are literally contagious, how the human brain's open-loop limbic system means we physically catch the feelings of the people around us.
They cold.
Just like a cold. And how a leader's primary job is to create resonance.
That shared vibrating frequency of positivity and high performance.
Yes. But today we are shifting gears completely. We are moving out of the theoretical realm of emotional resonance and sprinting headfirst into the visceral, hard-hitting, practical toolkit of actual on-the-ground leadership.
The execution phase.
Exactly. We are talking about execution.
We are moving from the what and why directly into the how. How does a leader actually manifest this resonance on a random Tuesday morning? When the stakes are high, the deadlines are looming, the coffee machine is broken, and the team is completely fractured.
A very specific, very relatable Tuesday.
Right. That is the mission of this deep dive. We're going to explore the actual repertoire of leadership styles at your disposal.
The actual tools.
Exactly. And then we were going to sprint right into the incredible, almost sci-fi reality of neuroplasticity. We're going to look at how you, listening to this right now, can physically, biologically rewire your brain to become the kind of leader who naturally creates resonance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to make this dopaminergic sprint really work, we need a mental model.
We do.
We need a visual to hold on to.
Well, the authors use a brilliant analogy for this. Imagine a professional golfer facing a wildly complex championship course.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They are standing at the tee, assessing the wind, the water hazards, the distance to the pin. Now, a novice might just pull out their driver for every single shot.
Hoping brute force and enthusiasm will eventually get the ball in the hole.
Exactly. But a master doesn't just use a driver. They have an entire array of clubs in their bag.
Right.
Specifically, when it comes to the game of leadership, the research suggests there are 6 clubs.
6 distinct styles.
6 styles. The absolute best, most high-impact leaders don't just rigidly apply their default personality trait to every single problem.
They adapt.
They read the terrain instantly, they reach into their bag, they pull out the exact right tool for that specific moment, and they execute seamlessly.
The golf bag of leadership. I love it. It immediately makes you realize how ridiculous it is to treat every workplace problem with the exact same emotional tone.
It is ridiculous, yeah.
So let's open up the bag. The first 4 clubs we are going to pull out are what the sources call the resonance builders.
The foundational clubs.
Right. These are the tools that fundamentally drive the emotional climate of a team upward. Let's start with the big one. The big driver. The visionary style. Tell me about this one.
So the core concept of the visionary style is that it moves people toward shared dreams.
Okay.
It sets the destination, the ultimate shining goal on the horizon, but, and this is the crucial part that distinguishes it from micromanagement, it leaves the actual route up to the team.
Interesting.
It doesn't dictate the step-by-step instructions. It paints a picture of the future that is so compelling, so emotionally resonant, that people willingly figure out the steps themselves to get there.
Okay, but hold on. If I'm totally honest, if I'm drowning in spreadsheets and my boss walks in and just starts giving a grandiose speech about our shared dreams,
You're going to roll your eyes.
I might roll my eyes. There's a really fine line between being a visionary and just being a boss who hands down an impossible goal and refuses to help the team figure out how to achieve it.
Oh, absolutely.
So how does this actually look when it works?
That is a very fair skepticism, and it brings us to a fantastic example from the research. Consider a woman named Shawana Leroy.
Okay.
She takes over a social work agency in a major city. Now imagine the environment before she got there.
Probably pretty bleak.
Extremely. The previous director was a notorious rule-bound, bureaucratic micromanager. The air in that office was thick with red tape, resentment, and exhaustion.
Wow.
The social workers are just punching the clock, drowning in paperwork, completely disconnected from why they got into social work in the first place.
Right. Their limbic systems are basically flatlining. They are surviving, not thriving.
Precisely. Then Shawana walks in. Now, if she were just a bad boss with a pipe dream, she'd say, we need to double our output, figure it out, and then just retreat to her office.
And nothing would change.
Right. But she didn't do that. She tossed the entire bureaucratic mindset out the window.
Really?
She stood in front of her people and sold a genuine vision. She basically said, we are not here to fill out forms in triplicate. We're here to maximize our service to impoverished families in this city.
That's a huge shift.
That is our North Star. If a rule gets in the way of helping a family, we change the rule.
Oh, wow. So she didn't just give them a pep talk. She redefined their entire purpose. She gave them permission to care again.
Exactly. And the atmosphere in that agency instantly shifted. Because what the visionary style does, when executed correctly, is give people profound clarity.
Yeah.
When you know the big picture and you deeply understand how your specific everyday job fits into that grand design, you feel a massive sense of pride. The mundane tasks suddenly have grand meaning.
That reminds me of another incredible story from the sources. Bob Pittman.
Oh yeah, the amusement park.
Right. When he was taking over a struggling amusement park, he's doing a walkthrough, looking at the janitorial staff. Normally, a traditional boss just walks up and says, hey, Section 4 is dirty, go sweep it up.
Standard operational command.
Right. But Pittman reframed their entire existence. He pulled them together and told them, listen, your job is not to sweep up trash.
A great reframe.
It's incredible. He said, your job is to keep the customers happy, because if the park is dirty, the customers aren't happy. So you aren't just cleaners. You are the front line of customer happiness.
That changes everything for them biologically.
It does. By tying the completely mundane, often thankless act of sweeping a floor to a grand, emotionally resonant vision, he elevated their primal emotional state. They weren't just janitors anymore. They were experience makers.
What's fascinating here is the underlying emotional intelligence required to pull off what Pittman and Leroy did. You absolutely cannot fake being a visionary.
People see right through it.
People's limbic systems will detect the inauthenticity immediately. It relies heavily on two specific emotional intelligence competencies, inspiration and empathy.
You have to actually mean it.
You have to genuinely believe in the vision yourself, which requires immense self-confidence. But you also need profound empathy. You have to sense how others feel, understand their daily frustrations, and articulate a vision that actually rings true for them.
Otherwise, it's just corporate speak.
Exactly. A leader who misreads their people will pitch a vision that falls completely flat, leading exactly to that eye-rolling reaction you mentioned earlier.
So it's like trying to hit a massive drive off the tee, but you haven't checked the wind and you have the wrong grip.
You're just going to slice it straight into the woods.
So when is the exact right time to pull out this big driver?
The visionary club is most effective when a business is totally adrift, when it's in turnaround mode, or when it desperately needs a new compass.
When morale is just gone.
Right. When the team is looking around asking, why are we even doing this anymore? That is when you pull out the visionary style. It is, according to the data, the most effective style overall for driving a positive emotional climate.
But obviously you can't just hit drives all day.
No, you'd ruin the game.
If you use the driver on the putting green, you're going to destroy the course. Sometimes you need nuance.
You need a softer touch.
Sometimes you need to lay up to get highly precise. That brings us to our second club, the coaching style. This is your precision iron. What does this look like in practice?
So the coaching style is entirely focused on the individual. Its core concept is connecting what a single person wants out of their life and career with the organization's overall goals. It's about personal development, deep listening, and mentorship. And yet, the research shows it is criminally underused in the modern workplace.
Let me guess why. Because it takes way too much time.
Bingo.
In our high-pressure, quarterly, earnings-driven world where everyone has back-to-back Zoom meetings and an overflowing inbox, sitting down and really listening to an employee's hopes and dreams feels like a luxury leaders think they simply can't afford.
That is exactly the justification most leaders use.
Ooh.
But the data shows they are shooting themselves in the foot because the payoff of the coaching style is visceral and long-lasting.
How so?
The source material gives us a very evocative example of this in action. Picture a corporate office late at night. An employee who happens to be 8 months pregnant is working late on a project.
Oh, man.
She's exhausted, she's stressed. Suddenly she hears footsteps. She looks up, startled, and sees her boss standing in the doorway.
I can already feel my own limbic system spiking just thinking about that.
Pure anxiety.
Yes. If I'm working late and the boss walks in, my immediate thought is, what did I do wrong? Does he need another report by tomorrow morning?
That is the standard dissonant reaction. But in this case, the boss comes in, sits down, and doesn't ask a single question about the spreadsheets or the deadlines.
Really?
He asks about her. How is she doing? Where does she want to go in her career? What are her actual dreams for her professional life after the baby comes? He spends the time to have a deeply human conversation.
Think about the emotional bond that creates.
It's massive.
That leader wasn't just checking off a human resources box. He was actively demonstrating empathy and emotional self-awareness. He was stepping into her world.
And the coaching style works so well precisely because it sends a very clear primal message to the employee's brain.
Which is?
I believe in you, I am investing in you, and I expect your best efforts. It aligns a person's individual life trajectory with the company's trajectory.
Wow.
The employee realizes that doing great work for the company is actually the vehicle for achieving their own personal dreams.
Right. It completely changes the dynamic. It's not just how do we get this project done so the company makes money. It's how does mastering this specific project help you build the skills you need to become a VP in 5 years?
Exactly.
When you do that, you aren't just a boss anymore. You are a mentor. You've earned their loyalty on a cellular level. They will run through brick walls for you because they know you are looking out for their future.
Precisely. Now, let's look at club number 3, the affiliative style.
Okay, what's this one?
If the visionary is the driver and coaching is the precision iron, the affiliative style is your sand wedge.
A sand wedge.
It's the club you use when you are stuck in a trap, things are messy, and you need to get out safely without causing further damage.
Okay, so this is about recovery and smoothing things over.
The affiliative style is all about creating harmony, healing rifts. Its core unspoken motto is, people come first.
Right.
Affiliative leaders focus intensely on the emotional needs of their employees, sometimes even placing those emotional needs above the immediate work goals.
Which feels counterintuitive in business.
It does. But they are the ones who recognize employees as whole people. They're the leaders who offer genuine emotional support during a divorce, a family illness, or just a deeply stressful high-stakes quarter.
The ultimate real-world example of this is Joe Torre when he was managing the New York Yankees.
The perfect example.
If you think about the pressure cooker of a World Series run in New York, it is unimaginable. The media scrutiny, the demanding fans, the sheer weight of expectations. It's a psychological meat grinder.
Absolutely brutal.
But Torre didn't just focus on the mechanics of hitting and pitching. He didn't just run drills. He focused obsessively on the emotional state of his players.
He was managing the limbic system of the team.
Exactly. He nurtured the connective tissue of the team. He made sure they felt supported, understood, and deeply bonded to one another.
He was building emotional capital during the downtime, so that when the pressure hit its absolute peak in the postseason, the team didn't fracture under the stress. They leaned on each other.
That's incredible.
That is the brilliance of the affiliative style. It builds tremendous loyalty and strengthens connectedness. It is the perfect tool when you need to heighten team harmony, improve communication, or repair broken trust after a major conflict.
But There is a massive trap here, isn't there?
Oh, huge one.
Because as we are talking about this, my mind immediately goes to a former manager I had who was way too nice.
We all know one.
Like so desperate to be everyone's friend that nothing ever got done. And the high performers eventually quit in frustration because the slackers are never held accountable.
You have just hit on the exact dark side of this style that the sources warn heavily against. They call it anxious affiliation.
Anxious affiliation.
Yes. If a leader uses the affiliative style exclusively, if it's the only club in their bag or takes a permanent backseat to feelings,
Right.
the leader becomes so worried about being liked, so terrified of any form of conflict, that they never offer corrective feedback.
Right. If an employee is consistently handing in terrible work, the affiliative leader might just praise them for their great effort to avoid hurting their feelings.
Exactly. And the result is catastrophic for the team. Mediocrity becomes the accepted standard. The high performers, as you mentioned, become deeply resentful.
Because they're carrying all the weight.
And the leader becomes completely clueless, leaving followers rudderless in a storm, because no one is willing to make the hard, unpopular calls. Harmony without accountability is just a pleasant path to failure.
That is such a vivid warning. You can't just be the nice guy all the time. You have to swing the club, not just polish it and ask everyone how they feel about the golf course.
All said.
Which brings us to the final resonance building club, the democratic style. This is your putter. It's for close range, precise consensus.
The democratic style is rooted entirely in valuing input. It's about listening deeply and getting commitment through participation. The underlying emotional intelligence fuels here are teamwork, collaboration, and conflict management. A democratic leader doesn't just dictate from on high. They literally pull up a chair, sit down with the team, and say, here is the complex problem we are facing. I don't have all the answers. What are your thoughts? How should we proceed together?
It's the ultimate buy-in generator.
Exactly.
Because human nature dictates that when people have a hand in designing the plan, they are deeply emotionally invested in its success. They aren't just following orders from corporate, they're executing their own ideas.
They own it.
They want it to work to prove themselves right.
And this style works perfectly when a leader themselves is genuinely unsure of the best direction and needs fresh ideas from capable, knowledgeable employees. It taps into the collective intelligence of the room.
Makes sense.
But, just like the putter, you wouldn't use it to tee off on a 400-yard hole. The democratic style fails spectacularly under certain conditions.
Let's talk about those conditions, because death by committee is a very real phenomenon in corporate America.
It is. The democratic style fails if the team is incompetent, underinformed, or lacking the necessary context to make a good decision. You don't ask a team of junior interns to vote on a massive corporate merger.
Right, that would be a disaster.
But most critically, it fails if you are in a state of extreme emergency. If the building is on fire, you do not call a committee meeting to discuss everyone's feelings about the various exit strategies. You need immediate, decisive, unilateral action.
Which is the perfect, seamless transition, because we are about to shift the energy of this deep dive completely. We've talked about the resonance builders, the styles that lift the emotional climate, that build trust, that make people want to come to work.
The good stuff.
But now,
Yeah.
here's where it gets really interesting. We are entering the danger zone.
The dark side.
If the first four styles were carefully crafted golf clubs, these next two styles are like chainsaws.
I love that comparison.
They are incredibly powerful. They are absolutely necessary in one very specific extreme scenario. But if you carry them around and use them as your daily tools, you will absolutely destroy everything and everyone around you.
A very apt analogy. The dissonant styles, when used poorly or exclusively, create a highly toxic emotional climate. They drive people into a downward spiral of frustration, resentment, and fear. Let's look at the first chainsaw. The pace-setting style.
Well, yeah, the pace setter. I feel like everyone has worked for this person at least once.
Almost certainly.
The core concept here is leading by example, but on absolute steroids. It's setting massive, almost impossible goals and demanding that everyone keep up. It is pure, unfiltered, aggressive, I'll just do it myself energy.
Pace-setters are driven by an intense, almost obsessive need for achievement. They hold themselves to incredibly high standards, and they expect everyone else to naturally operate at that exact same level without needing any instruction.
Which is impossible.
Exactly. If someone is struggling, the pace-setter doesn't pull out the coaching iron. They view that person as an obstacle slowing them down.
The sources give us this incredible, highly relatable example of a guy named Sam.
Oh, Sam.
Sam is the star techie. He's a brilliant engineer. an absolute genius individual contributor. He works late, he crushes his code, he is simply the best of the best. Because he's so good at writing code, upper management decides to promote him to manage the engineering team.
A classic corporate mistake.
Because Sam is a disastrous leader. He has zero emotional intelligence. When his team inevitably lags behind his genius pace, he doesn't inspire them. He literally pushes them aside, takes over their keyboards, and does the work himself.
Ouch.
He micromanages every single line of code because he fundamentally believes no one can do it as well as he can.
And what do you think happens to his team's emotional state?
They must feel utterly demoralized. They feel like they are constantly failing his impossible standards. Why even try if Sam is just going to rewrite it anyway?
Exactly. Their morale is decimated. And this is where the neuroscience we discussed in part 1 comes roaring back into play. Remember the open-loop limbic system?
Catching of emotions.
The team doesn't just logically observe Sam's frustration. They physically, biologically catch it. Sam is constantly radiating impatience, stress, and disappointment.
And their brains just soak it up.
The team's limbic systems sync up with his high-frequency anxiety.
Yep.
And here's the neurological kicker. When the human brain is flooded with anxiety and stress hormones like cortisol, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking, creative, problem-solving part of the brain, literally freezes up.
Wow.
It shuts down to prepare for fight or flight. So Sam's pace-setting style is biologically shutting down his team's cognitive functions.
That is terrifying. He's trying to force them to work faster and be smarter, but his aggressive emotional radiation is literally paralyzing their brains.
It is the ultimate biological backfire.
They literally cannot perform well under that specific kind of pressure.
It is a fascinating paradox. Now, does pace-setting ever work?
I mean, it has to sometimes, right?
Yes, but only in a very, very narrow context. If you have a team of highly motivated, highly competent experts, say, a team of top-tier research scientists on the verge of a breakthrough, or an elite squad of trial lawyers who need very little direction and are intrinsically motivated by the work itself, a pace-setting leader can set a high bar and watch them clear it.
Because they're already wired that way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of situations, using this as your primary style is a guaranteed recipe for burnout, massive turnover, and collapsed morale.
Okay, let's look at the second chainsaw, the most dangerous one of all if mishandled. The commanding style, also known as the coercive style.
The classic boss.
The core concept here is brutally simple. Do it because I say so. It demands immediate, unquestioning compliance. There is no vision sharing, there is no coaching, there is no consensus, just orders.
And if subordinates fail to follow those orders immediately, the commanding leader relies heavily on threats and intimidation. Feedback is exclusively negative. It's focused solely on what people are doing wrong, never on what they're doing right. This style is the classic, stereotypical boss archetype from the mid-20th century industrial era.
Right, the factory floor boss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the modern knowledge-based workplace, it is a dinosaur, and it is a highly toxic one.
There is a story in the research about a hospital CEO that perfectly illustrates how destructive this can be. Picture this. A new CEO is brought in as a turnaround artist because the hospital is losing money. He immediately starts swinging the chainsaw.
Sashing.
He slashes budgets, fires people left and right, and he does it with zero empathy. He alienates the administrative staff so profoundly that a dark, anxious cloud settles over the entire executive floor. But it doesn't stop there.
No, because as we know, emotions cascade down the hierarchy.
Emotional waterfall.
The intimidated, highly resentful administrators pass that toxic mood down to the department heads. They are short-tempered and demanding. The department heads then pass that stress down to the doctors. The doctors pass it to the nurses. And ultimately, who suffers the most at the bottom of this emotional waterfall?
The patients.
Exactly. The patients who are vulnerable and desperately need a cheerful, supportive, empathetic environment to heal are instead being cared for by a terrified, resentful, exhausted nursing staff.
That is so sad.
The CEO's commanding style at the very top of the pyramid literally poisoned the emotional ecosystem of the entire hospital, all the way down to the bedside.
It's the butterfly effect of bad vibes. A CEO yells at a VP, and 3 days later, a patient gets substandard care because a nurse is too stressed to focus.
Exactly.
But, and here's the twist I was waiting for, there is a time and a place for the chainsaw. When does the commanding style actually work? because there has to be a reason it's considered one of the 6 clubs.
You only pull out this club in absolute code red emergencies.
Like the literal fire we mentioned.
Right. If there is a literal fire in the building, you don't ask for a democratic consensus on which stairwell to use. You command people to exit immediately.
Do it because I said so.
Exactly. In a business context, it is used during a hostile takeover, a severe existential financial crisis, or when an organization's culture is so deeply dysfunctional, so frozen in bad habits, that it requires a massive violent shock to the system to wake people up.
Okay, that makes sense. And there's a brilliant story about a food company president that illustrates this perfectly. He gets brought into this failing division to turn things around. He goes into the executive boardroom for his very first meeting, and he sees this giant, intimidating marble conference table.
The Starship Enterprise table.
Yes. He later said it looked like the deck of the Starship Enterprise. The executives are sitting miles apart from each other, completely terrified to speak, hiding behind this massive slab of cold stone. It's a physical manifestation of their broken, siloed, paranoid culture.
It's literally blocking them.
So what does he do? He doesn't sit down and use the affiliative style to ask them how they feel about the table. He orders the maintenance crew to come in with sledgehammers and literally demolish it. He smashes the table to pieces right there.
That is a brilliant, highly calibrated use of the commanding style. Notice what he did. He didn't attack the people. He attacked the symbol of their dysfunction.
It was a very strategic shock.
It was a commanding, forceful, aggressive move that immediately unfroze the culture. The shock value shattered the old norms. Suddenly, they are meeting in a normal room, sitting close together at a smaller table, and they are forced to actually talk to one another.
He cleared the roadblock.
He used the chainsaw to cut away the rot, and then he put it away. And that is the absolute key to the commanding style. Emotional self-control. A leader using this style must have total control over their anger, using it surgically and purposefully, not just throwing an indiscriminate temper tantrum.
So what does this all mean? Because this brings us to a massive contradiction. The elephant in the room that I think a lot of listeners are wondering about. The sources call it the SOB paradox.
Ah, yes, the paradox.
If emotional intelligence, empathy, and resonance are so scientifically critical to a company's success, why are there so many insanely rich, successful, famously mean-spirited, commanding CEOs out there? We all know the stories. The screaming matches in the boardroom, the throne phones, the public humiliations.
They're legendary.
Think about the folklore around Steve Jobs or early Bill Gates. How do they succeed on such a massive scale if they are creating so much dissonance?
This raises an important question, and it's one that skeptics of emotional intelligence bring up constantly. The research provides a very nuanced, multi-layered answer to the SOB paradox. First, we have to look closely at who these SOB leaders actually are and who they are leading.
Okay, let's break that down.
Often, the legendary temperamental leaders like Bill Gates in the early days of Microsoft are leading incredibly brilliant, self-motivated teams. Gates was a severe pace setter and a harsh commander, but he was surrounded by fellow geniuses who were driven by the technology itself, not necessarily by his emotional warmth.
They were just as obsessed as he was.
Exactly. They tolerated his dissonance because they shared his obsessive drive to win and to build revolutionary software.
So they were basically insulated by the sheer talent and intrinsic motivation of the people below them. It's like they succeeded in spite of the yelling, not because of it.
That's a great way to put it. And furthermore, if you look at the organizational structure, the leaders below the SOB CEO, the division heads, the vice presidents, are often the ones actually doing the heavy lifting of emotional intelligence.
They're the ones cleaning up the emotional mess.
They're acting as human shock absorbers. They take the screaming from the CEO, buffer the team from that rage, and then use the affiliative, coaching, and visionary styles to keep their specific divisions functioning at a high level.
So the CEO gets all the credit, but the VPs are providing the actual emotional glue.
Exactly. And there's another angle to this, right? The phase of the company's life cycle. Think about Jack Welch at General Electric. Early in his tenure, he earned the nickname Neutron Jack.
Neutron Jack! That's terrifying!
Because, like a neutron bomb, he would eliminate the people but leave the building standing.
Wow.
He was a ruthless commander, firing tens of thousands of people, demanding top-tier performance, eliminating entire layers of management. He was swinging the chainsaw every single day.
But if we look at Jack Welch's entire career arc, he didn't stay Neutron Jack. He used the commanding style during a specific phase to save the company from bureaucratic stagnation.
Right, the crisis phase.
But once the crisis passed and the company was stabilized, he fundamentally transitioned. He put the chainsaw away. He became a massive proponent of visionary leadership. He invested heavily in training. He spent countless hours coaching his executives. He built a culture of learning.
The SOB phase was just that, a phase. The mistake observers make is looking at a highly visible CEO's aggressive moments or their crisis management phase and assuming that is the entirety of their leadership repertoire.
They just see the highlight reel of anger.
Exactly. The data shows overwhelmingly that the most successful CEOs, the ones who sustain excellence over decades, possess a critical mass of emotional intelligence. The pure, unadulterated SOB leader who only commands eventually burns their organization to the ground.
Which perfectly leads us into Section 3, the chameleon effect and CEO disease. Because the holy grail of leadership isn't picking one of these 6 clubs and making it your entire personality. It's fluidly, seamlessly switching between them all as the situation demands.
This is what the researchers call the art of style switching. The most resonant, highly effective leaders don't have a rigid, unyielding personality. They're emotional chameleons.
They blend in.
They read the room, they read the individual, they assess the external pressures, and they adapt their style in real time.
Let's look at Joan. Joan is a fantastic case study in the sources. She is brought in as the general manager of a global food division that is absolutely bleeding out. They're facing a $50 million deficit.
A massive hole.
The top management team she inherits is toxic, deeply mistrustful of one another, and miserable. Joan has a massive mountain to climb. How does she do it? She doesn't just walk in and start giving orders, even though they're in a financial crisis.
No. She systematically utilizes the entire golf bag. In her first week, she relies heavily on the affiliative style. She takes every single member of the management team out for lunch or dinner, one-on-one.
Building that sand wedge foundation.
Exactly. She doesn't interrogate them about the $50 million deficit.
Yeah.
She asks them about their lives, their dreams, their families, their frustrations. She builds the emotional connective tissue that had completely rotted away.
Then once she has that baseline of trust, she switches to the democratic style. She calls group meetings. But she doesn't dictate the solution. She gets them talking to each other about the business problems.
Getting that collective buy-in.
She forces them out of their paranoid silos to collaborate on a diagnosis of the deficit.
Once she has their input, she pulls out the big driver, the visionary style. She synthesizes all of their ideas into a crystal clear, highly ambitious new goal for the division. She paints the vibrant picture of their recovery and what it will feel like to win again.
And then finally, when the vision is set and the team is aligned, she drops into the pace-setting style. She holds them relentlessly accountable for executing the vision they helped create. She drives hard for results.
And the outcome.
In just 7 months, that toxic, failing division was $5 million ahead of their target. She orchestrated a $55 million swing in 7 months, not by being a financial genius, but by knowing exactly which emotional club to swing at which specific time.
And this isn't just an isolated anecdote about one superstar GM. The data backs this up at a systemic, macro level. The source material highlights a major study of schools in the UK. They analyzed the leadership styles of headmasters across various districts.
Okay, what did they find?
The result. In the highly effective, high-performing schools, the headmasters consistently used 4 or more of the leadership styles. They were fluid.
The chameleons.
Exactly. They could be visionary with the whole faculty during an assembly, coaching with a struggling new teacher in private, and affiliative during a stressful grading period. But in the low-performing, failing schools,
Let me guess. One club.
the leaders were rigid. They were stuck relying on just 1 or 2 styles, and typically they were stuck in the dissonant command and control modes.
So this begs a massive, incredibly frustrating question. If style switching is the proven magical key to a $55 million turnaround in high-performing organizations, why don't all leaders just do it? Why do so many bosses just stay stubbornly stuck in their one terrible, rigid style?
Because they are blind to their own incompetence. They suffer from a psychological phenomenon the researchers call CEO disease.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Talk about the research here, because when I read this, it completely blew my mind. It explains so much about corporate life.
Researchers asked a large group of CEOs to rate themselves on a variety of emotional intelligence competencies, things like empathy, self-awareness, adaptability, conflict management. Then they went and asked those exact same CEOs' subordinates to rate them on those exact same metrics.
A 360 review.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For the top-performing leaders, the self-ratings and the subordinate ratings matched perfectly. The great leaders saw themselves exactly as their people saw them. They had high self-awareness.
But the bad leaders, the ones running the failing companies.
The leaders of the poor-performing companies rated themselves incredibly high. They truly, genuinely thought they were fantastic, highly empathetic, visionary leaders.
But they weren't.
No, their subordinates rated them terribly. There was a massive gaping chasm between the leader's self-perception and objective reality.
CEO disease. And it makes total sense when you think about the mechanics of a hierarchy. The higher you go in an organization, the fewer people are willing to tell you the unvarnished truth.
You're in a bubble.
When you are the CEO, your jokes are suddenly always hilarious. Your mediocre ideas are treated like absolute genius. You are surrounded by yes men whose own livelihoods depend on keeping you happy. You lose touch with reality because the hierarchy actively shields you from negative feedback.
And this leads to the classic imagery of the boiling frog. If you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, it jumps out immediately. The shock to the system is obvious.
Right.
But if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly, gradually turn up the heat, the frog's nervous system doesn't register the incremental change. It just sits there, feeling slightly warmer, adjusting to the new normal, until it literally boils to death.
That is exactly what happens to a leader's emotional habits over a 20-year career. You don't wake up one Tuesday morning and decide to become a toxic, dissonant commander. It happens by degrees.
Step by step.
You snap at an employee once under pressure, and you get a fast result. So your brain logs that as a win. You do it again next month. You stop listening to feedback because you're too busy driving results. You slowly accumulate these bad limbic habits degree by degree, year by year, until one day your emotional intelligence is dead, your company culture is boiling, your best people are quitting, and you don't even realize you are the one holding the match.
Exactly. You are blind to the boiling water because you created it so slowly. Which brings us to the ultimate existential question of this entire deep dive. If you are that frog, if you suddenly realize through some moment of clarity that you are stuck in a dissonant style, or if you just look at your golf bag and realize you only have 2 clubs and you want all 6, can you change?
Okay, let's unpack this. We are entering section 4, metamorphosis, wiring the brain for resonance. Can you actually change your default leadership style? Because we are told our whole lives by society, by pop psychology, people don't change. A leopard can't change its spots. You are who you are by the time you're 30. Is that true?
The science says unequivocally, no, it is not true. You can absolutely fundamentally change, but it is not easy, and it does not happen the way most corporate training programs think it happens.
Let's look at the example of a guy named Mimkin. Mimkin worked in the fiercely competitive, cutthroat world of the financial services industry. For the first part of his career, his default modes were terrifying pace setter and aggressive commander.
He was a classic shark.
He was intimidating, he demanded perfection, and he got results through sheer blunt force will. But eventually, he hit a wall. His style was burning his people out, and his agency's performance stagnated. He realized that to go to the next level, he couldn't just yell louder. He had to change his emotional approach.
A total shift.
And he didn't just read a pamphlet or attend a weekend retreat. He consciously, painfully committed to rewiring his behavior over years. He actively practiced the visionary and affiliative styles. He forced himself to shut up and listen. He forced himself to ask about his employees' lives.
Which was totally against his nature.
And what happened? Within 5 years, he took his agency from the bottom quartile nationally to the top quartile. He completely transformed his business results by physically transforming his brain.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to understand the biological mechanics of how Mimkin did this, because this is the absolute crux of the entire book. Most leadership development fails because it targets the wrong part of the brain. Leadership does not live in the neocortex.
Explain the difference here, because this science is the key to unlocking everything we've talked about. What is the neocortex versus the limbic system?
So the human brain has different sectors that handle different types of learning. The neocortex is the thinking brain. It's the rational, analytical part of your brain that learns concepts, analyzes data, and understands logic. It learns very, very quickly. You can read a manual on how to use a new accounting software, and your neocortex instantly grasps the instructions. You get it immediately.
But leadership isn't a software program. You can't just read a bulleted list on how to be empathetic and suddenly become empathetic.
Exactly, because leadership, emotional intelligence, how you react under stress, how you handle a screaming client, these are governed by the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, and the basal ganglia, a very primitive structure located near the brainstem. These areas govern your habits.
The deeply ingrained stuff.
They govern your default automatic reactions that were formed decades ago, often in early childhood or your first stressful job. When you get stressed, your neocortex doesn't rationally decide how to act. Your basal ganglia hijack the system and trigger your oldest, most deeply ingrained habit to protect you.
So if your dad was a yeller and you learned early on that yelling equals authority and control, your limbic system defaults to yelling when a project goes off the rails at work. Your neocortex might know yelling is bad, but your limbic system takes the wheel.
Yes. And here is the problem. The limbic system is an incredibly slow learner. You cannot change a limbic habit by simply reading a book or sitting through a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation from HR on active listening. The neocortex understands the PowerPoint perfectly, but the limbic system doesn't care. To rewire the limbic system, to change a default habit, you have to engage in intense, repetitive physical practice.
It's neuroplasticity. We have to talk about myelin here.
Precisely. When you practice a new behavior, your brain wraps that specific neural pathway in a fatty, insulating substance called myelin. Think of it like paving a dirt road. A brand new behavior is a muddy, slow dirt road. But the more you practice it, the more myelin your brain deposits on that pathway.
And what does the myelin do?
The more myelin, the faster the electrical signal travels. Eventually, with enough repetition, that pathway becomes a highly paved, high-speed superhighway, and the new behavior becomes your automatic default reaction. It becomes stronger than the old habit. It is exactly the same neurological process as learning to hit a perfect golf drive or learning to play the violin. It requires reps.
Okay, so how do we actually get the reps? The source material provides a brilliant, structured roadmap for this rewiring process. It's Richard Boyatzis' self-directed learning model. It's called the 5 Discoveries. Think of this as the grueling, multi-month workout plan for your limbic system. Let's walk through it step by step because none of these are easy.
Let's start with Discovery 1, my ideal self. Who do I want to be? Now, this isn't just writing down a bland corporate mission statement. This is a deep, agonizing, gut-level exploration of your ultimate values, your legacy, and your dreams. You have to catch a vivid, emotional vision of your future self that is so exciting, so deeply compelling, that it unleashes a primal passion inside you.
And why is that passion so necessary? Because rewiring your brain is going to be incredibly frustrating. It's going to be exhausting. You're going to fail repeatedly. If your ideal self isn't deeply motivating, if you're just trying to change because HR told you to, you will quit the second it gets hard. You have to find your deep personal why.
Exactly. Once you have that shining magnetic image of the leader you desperately want to be, you have to face the brutal reality of Discovery 2. My real self. Who am I right now?
Oh, man. This is the cure for CEO disease, and it is terrifying.
It is the most painful step. You have to stare directly into the mirror. You have to actively seek out and gather 360-degree feedback from your peers, your subordinates, your bosses, and maybe even your spouse. You have to find out how your emotional radiation is actually impacting people, where your strengths, and much more importantly, where the glaring, embarrassing gaps between your real self and your ideal self.
If you think you're a warm coaching leader, but your 360 feedback comes back saying everyone thinks you're a terrifying pace setter who micromanages them, the cognitive dissonance is brutal. The natural human reaction is to get defensive, to say, well, they just don't understand my high standards. But you have to swallow your pride and accept the data. You have to know your starting point.
Once you survive the shock and the ego bruising of Discovery 2, you move to Discovery 3. My learning agenda. This is where you build a highly feasible, practical, granular roadmap to bridge the gap between the real and the ideal.
So if your gap is that you lack empathy and you rely too much on the commanding style, your learning agenda isn't just a vague goal like be nicer. It has to be behavioral.
No.
It might include a specific goal, like every single day this week I will ask one employee about their life outside of work, and I will just listen for 5 unbroken minutes without interrupting, offering advice, or looking at my phone. It breaks the massive goal of changing your personality into daily, achievable neurological reps.
Which leads directly into the crucible of this entire process, Discovery 4, experimenting and practicing. This is the heavy lifting. This is where the neuroplasticity actually happens. happens. This is where you are actively, consciously forcing your brain down a new, highly uncomfortable, unpaved neural dirt road.
It's going to feel incredibly awkward. If you are a lifelong pace setter and you see your team struggling with a problem, your old, heavily myelinated neural pathway is screaming at you to jump in, take over the keyboard, and fix it. You literally feel it in your chest. To practice the democratic style, you have to consciously bite your tongue, fight your own biology, and ask, what do you guys think we should do? It will feel like wearing someone else's clothes. It will feel inauthentic at first.
It will. But every single time you bite your tongue and ask that question, you are depositing a microscopic layer of myelin onto that new neural pathway. You're paving the road. You practice it mentally on the drive to work. You visualize the interaction. You practice it in low-stakes meetings, and you practice it until months later, asking for input becomes your automatic default.
But you cannot do this in a vacuum. You will fail if you try to do this entirely alone. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, Discovery 5, supportive relationships.
You need a trusted circle, mentors, executive coaches, trusted peers, or a deeply supportive spouse. You need people who will provide a psychologically safe space for you to experiment with these new styles. You need people who will gently but firmly call you out when you inevitably slip back into your old dissonant habits under stress. And you need people who will give you the candid, ongoing feedback your limbic system needs to adjust its trajectory. As the authors state, leadership development requires the tumult and possibilities of our relationships. We learn who we are through our interactions with others.
Okay, we have covered massive, massive ground today. We went from the golf bag of the 6 leadership styles to the toxic dangers of CEO disease, all the way down to the microscopic rewiring of myelin in your basal ganglia. So I want to bring this right back to you, the listener. The ultimate overarching takeaway from this deep dive is empowerment. You are not locked into whatever leadership style you currently default to. You are not genetically doomed to be a toxic commander or an anxious conflict-avoidant affiliator forever. Your brain is plastic. It is malleable. With deep passion, brutal honesty, and relentless, exhausting practice, you are the architect of your own golf bag. You can forge the visionary driver. You can craft the coaching iron.
It requires immense intention. It requires stepping out of the comfortable, slow-boiling water of your accumulated habits, dropping your ego, and doing the hard neurological work of self-directed learning. But the payoff in your career trajectory, in your organization's financial performance, and frankly, in the sheer joy of creating positive emotional resonance with the human beings around you, is immeasurable.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We just talked about Discovery 5, the absolute biological necessity of supportive relationships in rewiring your brain. And remember, in part 1, we talked about how our open-loop limbic systems are constantly, automatically syncing up with the emotions of the people around us. We catch their feelings. So put those 2 scientific facts together. If your emotional brain is constantly mirroring and rewiring itself based on the people you spend the most time with, what does that mean for the peers you are choosing to surround yourself with tomorrow? Are your closest colleagues unknowingly programming your default leadership style? Are they pulling you upward toward resonance or dragging you down into toxic dissonance? If you want to change your club, you might seriously need to look at changing your golf partners.
A profound point to consider. The emotional ecosystem you inhabit dictates the neural pathways you build.
Exactly. Think about that as you walk into the office tomorrow morning. Look at your team, look at your boss, and look in the mirror. We're going to pause our sprint here, but this is only half the journey. In part 3, we are going to take everything we just learned about rewiring the individual leader, and we are going to scale it up to the macro level. We're going to talk about how you rewire the emotional reality of an entire team and an entire organization. It is going to be epic. Get ready to analyze your own repertoire, start laying down the myelin for those new neural pathways, and we will see you back here for the next deep dive into primal leadership.
Welcome back. Welcome back to part 3 of our 4-part deep dive into the absolute masterclass that is primal leadership. And if you've been with us on this journey so far, you already know we have covered some seriously heavy ground.
We really have. I mean, part 1 was essentially breaking down the actual anatomy of emotional intelligence, tearing apart what it fundamentally means to be an effective leader.
Right. And then in part 2, we got into the darker realities, honestly. How leaders can neurologically hijack a room, spreading either this toxic dissonance or, if they do it right, magnetic resonance. But today the mission shifts entirely. We are completely done with the theory.
Yeah, we are moving completely out of the classroom now because the architecture we've discussed so far, it's foundational, obviously, but it's ultimately static until you actually apply it.
So let's unpack this shift in perspective. Parts 1 and 2, they served as the flight simulator. You were sitting safely on the ground, learning what all the instruments do, understanding the aerodynamics of your own brain and how emotions ripple through a collective. But today,
Yeah.
you are actually flying the jet.
And not only are you flying it, but you are attempting to rebuild the engine midair while pulling heavy G-force.
Exactly. It's an absolute dopaminergic sprint through chapter 7 to 9 today. We were talking about the how. How do you actually rewire your own brain? How do you break out of the iron cage of your own deeply ingrained habits? And finally, how do you perform the kind of emotional alchemy required to resurrect a completely stagnant, dead-in-the-water team?
Which is, I mean, that is a massive operational leap. What we are really examining in this section of the source material is the biological reality of transformation. Because lasting behavioral change isn't some corporate performance metric that you just check off on a quarterly review.
It's not just a box on a spreadsheet.
No, it is a biological process. It requires a neurological rebellion against the status quo of your own mind. So as we move through this material today, I want you to picture a dynamic, shifting mental landscape. Imagine neural pathways lighting up like a city grid at night, old highways going dark as they are deliberately abandoned, and brilliant new bridges being built in real time. That is the physical reality of individual metamorphosis.
I love that visual. So we aren't just talking about changing your mindset. We are talking about literally re-architecting your neural pathways. And let's start with how that actually looks in practice, because the authors ground this intense neurology in a very human story. We have to look at Abdi Nasir Ali.
Yes, Ollie's story is incredible.
It perfectly encapsulates the sheer visceral power of waking up from professional autopilot. So Ali was a hydrogeologist working for an integrated energy multinational in the U.S., and on paper, he was the picture of stability. Mild-mannered employee, steady provider, consistently doing his job. But Ali had a very specific, carefully constructed life plan.
Though it's crucial to note that his plan was entirely deferred. He had placed his actual life on a profound delay.
Yes. His strategy was essentially a 15-year waiting room. He planned to just put his head down, grind it out in a job he felt, frankly, lukewarm about for a decade and a half, save up his money, and then finally, upon retirement, pursue his actual dream.
And his dream was deeply specific, wasn't it?
Super specific. He wanted to start an educational institution in his home country of Somalia, or perhaps a water purification company in East Africa. That was his core passion. But he had boxed it up. He was willingly sleepwalking through his prime years until he ended up in a corporate leadership development exercise.
And this wasn't an exercise focused on spreadsheets or margin optimization or, operational efficiency. The facilitators designed it specifically to force leaders to articulate their ideal selves, stripping away the immediate corporate context.
Right. And during this exercise, Ali experienced a sudden explosive awakening. The dissonance between his daily reality and his ultimate vision just became way too loud to ignore. He realized with absolute clarity that he was utterly disconnected from his passion.
He had to look at his life and think, why am I waiting 15 years to actually live?
Exactly. Why am I postponing the only work I genuinely care about? And in that moment, the holding pattern just shattered. He realized he didn't have to wait for retirement to utilize his emotional intelligence. He already possessed strong social awareness and relationship management skills. Within a single week, he was pitching entirely new, Africa-centric initiatives to his multinational company, actively finding ways to align his current 9-to-5 with his ultimate long-term dream.
It's a highly compelling narrative, but the underlying science is what makes Ollie's awakening replicable for anyone listening. We really have to ask why that specific exercise worked on him. Why do the authors of Primal Leadership insist that any true lasting change must begin with this, what they call the first discovery, the act of defining your ideal self?
Why do we have to start with the dream?
It comes down to the neuroscience of hope.
Okay, the neuroscience of hope. That sounds incredibly abstract for a hardcore leadership manual.
It sounds abstract until you look at the brain scans. It is entirely literal. When you vividly imagine your ideal life, say where you want to be 15 years from now, the specific environment, the caliber of people around you, the tactile feeling of your daily routine, you actively stimulate the left prefrontal cortex of your brain.
Your left prefrontal cortex, okay.
Yes, and this specific area is heavily associated with positive emotions, approach behavior, and most importantly, motivating hope. By flooding your brain with this imagery, you trigger a massive release of dopamine and other neurochemicals. And those chemicals provide the literal biological energy required to do the incredibly hard work of changing your habits.
So you basically have to trick your brain into optimism by painting the masterpiece before you even figure out how to buy the paint. Because if you don't generate that neurochemical fuel first, the friction of change will just grind you to a halt.
Precisely. Contrast that approach with what usually happens when people attempt to change their careers or their lives. Think about the standard corporate mindset. What is the very first thing most analytical professionals do when contemplating a massive shift?
Oh, they immediately build a risk matrix. They think about everything that's going to go wrong. The financial risks, the market obstacles, the sheer terror of public failure.
Right. And the moment you focus on the obstacles first, you activate a completely different neural pathway. You light up the right prefrontal cortex. This is the center associated with anxiety, fear, and avoidance.
But wait, from an evolutionary standpoint, isn't that right? Prefrontal cortex doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's trying to keep us alive.
Right. Absolutely. Evolutionary biology dictated that survival meant spotting the saber-toothed tiger hiding in the brush, not admiring the beauty of the sunset. Our brains are hardwired with a negativity bias to prioritize threat detection. Obstacle spotting kept our ancestors alive.
But in a modern strategic context,
That ancient hardware completely sabotages transformational change. It plunges you into paralyzing pessimism. If you start your journey by analyzing the obstacles, your brain biologically shuts down the motivation to proceed. You demotivate yourself before taking a single step.
man, that makes so much sense. You have to actively override the survival brain with the visionary brain. But figuring out what that vision, that masterpiece actually looks like is way harder than it sounds, because we are so deeply conditioned by the expectations of everyone around us that we often don't even know what our left prefrontal cortex actually wants. And the authors bring in a brilliant concept from the sociologist Max Weber to explain this trap,
The iron cage.
the iron cage.
It is one of the most pervasive psychological traps in modern professional life.
Yeah.
The iron cage of the ought self.
The ought self. I want to unpack this, because this is the life that someone else designed for you.
Yeah.
It's the life your parents said you ought to live. The prestigious career your university professors said you ought to pursue. The safe, linear trajectory your current boss says you ought to be on. We get so comfortable inside the iron cage of the ought self that we completely lose sight of the ideal self.
The source material actually quotes the management thinker Charles Handy on this exact phenomenon, and his confession is rather stunning. He admitted that he spent the entire early portion of his life trying incredibly hard to be someone else.
Just constantly playing a role.
Endlessly. He chased the ideal of being a great athlete, then a charismatic socialite, then a cutthroat businessman, then a prestigious institutional head. He spent decades aggressively climbing ladders that other people had placed in front of him, collecting titles and building a vast network while completely neglecting the person he naturally could be, simply because acknowledging his authentic self was too frightening to contemplate.
Climbing ladders that other people placed in front of you, that image is haunting. I mean, how many people listening right now are halfway up a corporate ladder that they don't even own? The book gives this incredible anecdote about a man from India that illustrates the ultimate break from the ought self.
The sitar player.
Yes. So this guy had an absolute burning passion for music. But dutifully bowing to his family's intense expectations, he locked himself in the iron cage. He went to school, got his degree, and became a dentist in Mumbai. He essentially lived his father's dream.
And we can infer the deep dissonance he experienced daily, operating so far outside his authentic ideal. The smell of the clinic, the routine, everything fighting his actual nature.
He lived with it until the dissonance just became deafening. He couldn't stay in the cage anymore. So what does he do? He breaks out. He completely abandons his established dental practice in Mumbai, moves across the world to New York City, and starts earning his living as a sitar player. And the crucial point here is he was thrillingly happy. He chose the uncertainty of the ideal over the absolute security of the ought.
What's fascinating to unpack here is how we secretly evaluate our own worth, because that internal evaluation directly dictates whether we fortify our iron cage or systematically dismantle it. The authors categorize this underlying metric into a philosophy of value. They argue that deep down, every leader filters the world through a primary lens that judges the fundamental worth of an idea, a strategy, or a person.
They break this down into three main operating philosophies, right? Pragmatic, intellectual, and humanistic.
Let's explore the mechanics of those lenses because they directly dictate your default leadership style. If you operate primarily with a pragmatic philosophy, your core belief is that usefulness determines worth. You value tangible results, speed, efficiency, and relentless execution.
So that naturally pulls you toward a pace-setting or commanding leadership style.
Mm.
You lead from the front, setting incredibly high standards. But your blind spot is the human element. You risk burning your people out because you view them as instruments of execution.
Exactly. Then you have the intellectual philosophy. This is the leader who values deep understanding above all else. They aren't satisfied with just hitting the target. They want to know the why, the grand overarching theory, the deep logic of the market ecosystem.
Which naturally leads to a visionary leadership style. They are brilliant at seeing the big picture and articulating a compelling future state, but they might struggle immensely with the mundane, day-to-day operational execution.
And finally, the humanistic philosophy. For this leader, the ultimate currency is relationships. The primary questions are always, how do people feel? How strong is the social fabric of the team? Are we connecting authentically?
So this worldview naturally feeds into an affiliative or coaching leadership style. These leaders build incredible loyalty, psychological safety, and team harmony. But their critical weakness is that they often struggle to make the tough, cold, bottom-line decisions that might hurt morale.
So, as you are listening to this, analyzing your own career trajectory, you have to ask yourself, are you actively chasing your ideal self, or are you comfortably trapped in an ought self built by your industry's expectations, your parents' desires, or your mortgage? Furthermore, are you evaluating your professional life through a pragmatic lens, an intellectual one, or a humanistic one? Because until you map your own internal operating system, you can't possibly begin the process of metamorphosis.
Which brings us to the necessary friction of the second phase. The first discovery is defining the ideal self, generating the hope to move forward. But the second discovery is far more confronting. It requires looking into the brutal mirror.
It is the act of confronting your real self.
And the greatest danger in discovering your real self isn't usually some massive, scandalous failure. The danger is the slow creep of complacency. Like Lauer's story at B.F. Goodrich, it is a classic case of the boiling frog.
The corporate heat turned up so slowly.
Exactly. The corporate heat was turned up so incrementally over his career that he completely anesthetized himself to his own misery. You don't lose your edge overnight. You don't wake up one Tuesday and suddenly realize you're a toxic, disconnected leader. You get poached slowly. It's the daily routine, the small, seemingly pragmatic compromises, the tiny moments where you choose the path of least resistance instead of the path of resonance.
Lauer had reached a significantly high level within the B.F. Goodrich organization, but he realized, through a painful process of self-auditing, that his passion had entirely evaporated. He was executing his duties perfectly, but he was entirely hollowed out inside.
And what's wild is that his solution wasn't just to take a sabbatical or go on a weekend retreat to recharge. He had to physically resign. He had to completely remove himself from the corporate environment that had numbed him to find his ideal self again. He eventually pivoted to a completely new path at a venture capital firm, fully re-engaged.
But you have to ask yourself why that extreme physical removal is sometimes necessary. Why couldn't Lauer just fix his mindset while staying at his executive desk? It comes down to the sheer power of our own ego defense mechanisms.
They are incredibly strong.
The human psyche is brilliantly designed to shield us from external information that might severely undermine our core self-perception. It's a psychological survival mechanism, allowing us to maintain our equilibrium under the immense stress of high-stakes environments. But in the process of protecting our ego, these defenses filter out essential, critical data, specifically how negatively our teams are actually responding to our behavior.
The source material references the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen here, and his concept perfectly captures this psychological filtering. Ibsen coined the term vital lies.
Vital lies. It's such a perfect phrase.
It really is. These are the soothing mistruths we swallow daily to avoid facing painful realities about our own incompetence or toxicity. We construct these elegant narratives to justify our worst traits. We tell ourselves, I'm not micromanaging my team, I'm just enforcing rigorous quality control. Or, I'm not an aggressive, unapproachable leader, I'm just deeply passionate about driving results. Vital lies. We construct entire impenetrable fortresses out of them.
And the architecture of that fortress changes depending on your position in the hierarchy. The higher you climb in an organization, the thicker the walls of vital lies become. This is what the authors diagnose as the CEO disease. The higher your rank, the less unfiltered truth you hear from your environment.
It's a terrifying structural paradox. The more power and influence you wield, the more you desperately need accurate, unvarnished feedback to wield it responsibly. But the more power you have, the less likely anyone is to risk giving you that accurate feedback.
Exactly, because the power dynamic inherently corrupts the data. Subordinates fear the leader's wrath, or they don't want to be penalized as the bearer of bad news, or they simply want to blend in as compliant, good citizens for the sake of their own promotion trajectory.
Everyone is just managing up.
Constantly managing up. The inevitable result is that senior leaders operate in a total, absolute feedback vacuum. The empirical data on this is staggering. When researchers compare self-assessments to 360-degree external assessments, high-level executives wildly inflate their own emotional intelligence scores. They genuinely perceive themselves as resonant, empathic visionaries, while their teams universally rate them as oblivious, tone-deaf tyrants. The gap between the internal self-perception and the external reality is a massive chasm.
So how do we systematically bridge that chasm? How do we cure the CEO disease and shatter the vital lies before they destroy a career? Completing this second discovery is essentially solving a massive psychological jigsaw puzzle. You take the vivid, hope-fueled image of your ideal self from the first discovery, and you lay it directly over the brutally honest, unfiltered image of your real self.
You overlay the map of where you want to be with the exact coordinates of where you currently stand.
And you look for the intersections, where the ideal and the real overlap. Those are your verified strengths. You celebrate those, you leverage them. But where they violently misalign, those are your critical gaps. That is the exact territory where the metamorphosis has to happen.
Which brings us to the core mechanics of the transformation. We have defined the dream, and we have measured the brutal reality. Now, how do we actually cross the bridge? This is section 3 of our deep dive, the metamorphosis protocol. Or, in neurological terms, this is where we discuss rewiring the basal ganglia. This covers chapter 8 of the source material, and it requires a complete dismantling of how corporations traditionally handle employee improvement.
Let's dig into this protocol because the authors immediately target a massive, almost universally accepted corporate practice. When an employee is struggling or a manager has a clear behavioral gap, the standard HR playbook is to deploy a PIP, a performance improvement plan.
And from a purely neurological standpoint, traditional performance improvement plans are often disastrously counterproductive.
Great, but corporate America literally runs on PIPs. It's the standard operating procedure for every Fortune 500 company. If they're a neurological disaster, what is the brain actually doing when a manager slides a PIP across the desk to an employee?
Think about the biological reaction. When you are handed a document that explicitly details your failures and ties your continued employment to hitting arbitrary behavioral metrics, your brain perceives a profound threat to your survival and your social standing.
The tiger in the brush.
Exactly. Your right prefrontal cortex immediately flares up. Cortisol spikes. Anxiety floods the system. And most importantly, the higher-order learning centers of the brain literally shut down to protect the ego. You are plunged into a defensive crouch. You cannot absorb new emotional intelligence skills when your neurobiology is screaming that you are under attack.
That is wild. So the very tool designed to force improvement actually triggers a biological response that makes learning impossible. It just feels like remedial punishment.
Which is why the authors strongly advocate replacing the performance agenda with a learning agenda. A performance agenda focuses entirely on achieving an external metric to prove your worth to a skeptical authority figure. A learning agenda, however, connects the required behavioral change directly to the individual's own personal dreams, their ideal self.
It links it back to the first discovery.
Precisely. It frames the difficult work of change, not as fixing a shameful defect, but as acquiring a necessary tool to reach your ultimate self-defined goal. It fundamentally shifts the emotional valence of the entire process from fear to hope.
That is a masterstroke in framing. It's the profound difference between a manager saying, you need to fix your abrasive communication style or you're fired, versus saying, you told me your ultimate dream is to run the international division in 5 years. Let's practice the advanced communication skills that will make you an unstoppable, undeniable candidate for that role. One triggers the right prefrontal cortex, the other triggers the left.
And once you have successfully established that hope-driven learning agenda, the question becomes, how do you execute the practice? Because you cannot learn complex emotional competencies in a vacuum. You have to treat your entire life as a laboratory. This introduces the concept of stealth learning.
Stealth learning. I love this concept so much. You don't learn emotional intelligence by sitting in a fluorescent-lit Marriott conference room for a 2-day seminar. filling out worksheets. You learn it in the chaotic reality of the grocery store line. You learn it managing your toddlers at the dinner table.
The real world is the only valid laboratory.
Take the story of Juan Tribino from the book. Tribino was a high-level leader who, through the brutal mirror phase, realized he had a massive gap. He completely lacked empathy. He was a pure pace setter who desperately needed to develop an affiliative coaching style of leadership.
So he didn't go read a textbook on empathy?
No. He turned his personal life into a behavioral lab. He started coaching his daughter's youth soccer team, forcing himself to practice deep listening and patient encouragement with erratic 10-year-olds. He volunteered his weekends at a local crisis center, answering phones, deliberately forcing himself to sit with other people's severe distress without jumping in to instantly fix it, which was his corporate default. He actively practiced his weakest leadership competencies in low-stakes environments outside of the corporate pressure cooker.
And from a neuroplasticity perspective, Tribino's approach is flawless. The research heavily validates this. The authors cite a longitudinal study conducted by Jane Wheeler at the Weatherhead School of Management. She tracked MBA students over several years and found a fascinating correlation. The individuals who practiced their newly acquired emotional intelligence skills in multiple diverse spheres of their life at home with their spouses, at church, in community volunteer groups, as well as at work, were the only ones who actually retained those skills years later.
Because they were forcing their brains to generalize the skill. If you only ever practice active listening in a formal board meeting, your brain categorizes active listening as a context-specific, highly artificial tool. But if you practice it with your spouse, your barista, and your direct reports, your brain realizes this isn't a temporary tool. It's a fundamental operating system upgrade. You lay down thicker, more resilient neural pathways.
Exactly. The brain stops compartmentalizing the behavior.
We see another brilliant example of stealth learning with Demetrios. He was an executive who desperately needed to practice visionary leadership, but he was terrified of looking foolish by suddenly giving grand, sweeping speeches to his team when he had historically been a pragmatic numbers guy. So he utilized stealth learning. He treated his own division as if it were his most important external consulting client.
Writing memos to himself.
Yes. He would sit down on weekends and write highly formal, visionary consulting memos to himself. He diagnosed the company's long-term vulnerabilities and proposed massive visionary solutions. He practiced the cognitive muscle of thinking like a visionary in total secret, building his internal competence and confidence before ever bringing that energy to his team.
We also see this with Mark Scott, who identified a gap in his flexibility and adaptability. He needed to become comfortable with ambiguity. So he deliberately forced himself into new, highly uncertain social situations, completely outside of his normal demographic comfort zone. He used these environments as a lab just to practice regulating his own internal anxiety and forcing himself to stay genuinely open to radically different perspectives.
But the authors add a massive caveat to all of this. You must deeply understand your own personal learning style. They use a great simple sailing analogy to illustrate this. Imagine two friends who both decide they want to master sailing. Friend A is an active, concrete learner. He goes straight to the boatyard, buys a battered small dinghy, drives it up to the freezing, rocky coast of Maine, throws it in the water, and figures out the mechanics by getting soaked, pulling the wrong ropes, and making real-time mistakes.
A very visceral approach.
Right. And then friend B is an abstract, reflective learner. Before he ever steps foot near the water, he signs up for an intensive classroom course in Boston Harbor, studies the fluid dynamics of wind on sails on a chalkboard, and reads 3 technical manuals.
Now, objectively, neither approach is incorrect. They are simply different cognitive pathways to the same competency. However, if you force the concrete, action-oriented learner into the Boston classroom, he will be paralyzed by boredom, his brain will disengage, and he will learn nothing. Conversely, if you force the reflective, analytical learner into the chaotic dinghy in Maine without a manual, his amygdala will hijack his brain with sheer terror. He will be overwhelmed, and he will learn nothing.
You cannot fight your own neurobiology. You must align your emotional intelligence training with how you actually process information. If you learn by doing, find a trusted peer and run real-time role-play scenarios. If you learn by reflecting, keep a meticulously detailed daily journal analyzing your emotional interactions. Do not force yourself into a corporate training methodology that clashes with your brain's natural architecture.
Speaking of that architecture, we really need to dive into the specific neurology of habit breaking. To understand why changing your leadership style is so agonizingly difficult, you have to understand the difference between explicit learning and implicit learning.
Okay, let's break that down.
Explicit learning is the absorption of data and facts. This happens in the neocortex, the brain's rational thinking center. The neocortex learns incredibly fast. You could read a textbook on the mechanics of active listening, perfectly understand the concepts in an hour, and ace a written exam on the subject tomorrow.
Right, but knowing the explicit definition of active listening does absolutely nothing for you when a client is screaming at you over a blown deadline. Your neocortex knows the right answer, but your actual behavior doesn't change.
Exactly, because leadership behaviors and emotional intelligence are not explicit memories. They are implicit memories. They do not reside in the rational neocortex. They are deeply embedded in the basal ganglia and its complex links to the amygdala and the brain's emotional centers. The basal ganglia is the brain's primitive habit center. It is designed to automate repeated behaviors so you don't have to consciously think about them. And the basal ganglia learns very, very differently than the neocortex. It learns at a glacial pace. It requires massive, sustained, repetitive practice to forge a new neural pathway strong enough to override the old default programming.
Which brings us to the story of Jack. Jack was a leader who had a severe, career-threatening gap. He completely lost his emotional self-control under pressure. When the market was stable and the office was calm, Jack was a fantastic, highly affiliative listener. But the absolute second a crisis hit and the pressure spiked, his amygdala would instantly hijack his brain. He would tune everyone out, his empathy would drop to zero, he would transform into a commanding dictator, and he would just start barking aggressive orders.
And the tragic part was, his neocortex knew it was toxic behavior.
Right. He knew he was doing it, but his basal ganglia kept running the default implicit program the moment stress was introduced.
So how did he successfully hack a brain structure that evolved over millions of years to prioritize automated reactions?
He used mental rehearsal and an incredibly rigid four-step protocol. Jack realized that to break a deep-seated habit in the basal ganglia, he couldn't just try harder. He had to literally interrupt the automatic neural firing sequence. So he created a non-negotiable rule for himself. The moment he felt the first physical somatic markers of stress, the tight chest, the flushed face, the shallow breathing, he forced himself to execute 4 explicit steps.
A manual override.
Exactly. Step 1, take a deep, deliberate breath to lower the heart rate. Step 2, look at the person in front of him and specifically ask what they're feeling or thinking about the crisis.
Step 3.
Actively listen to their entire answer without interrupting or planning his rebuttal. And step 4, respond thoughtfully based on their input.
But here is the genius part. He didn't just wait for a crisis to practice this. He utilized intense mental rehearsal. Jack would sit quietly in his office, close his eyes, and vividly imagine a highly stressful worst-case scenario at work. He would visualize the pressure rising, he would let his body feel the simulated stress, and then he would mentally rehearse himself executing those 4 steps with absolute perfection.
That mental rehearsal is key, because functional MRI scans show that vividly visualizing an action activates the exact same neural pathways in the brain as physically performing the action. By rehearsing the scenario repeatedly in his mind, Jack was laying down new, thicker neural cables in his basal ganglia without ever leaving his chair. He was literally rewriting his brain's automated response in the simulator so that when the real crisis hit, the new pathway was stronger than the old one.
It's a staggering demonstration of neuroplasticity. You are not a victim of your own habits. You are the architect of them. But there is one final crucial piece to this individual metamorphosis, the 5th discovery. And you could argue it is the most vital, because attempting to rewire your basal ganglia in isolation is almost mathematically impossible. The 5th discovery is the absolute necessity of the tribe.
You cannot execute a neurological rebellion alone. Your brain's default programming is simply too strong. You need external mirrors to reflect your blind spots, and you need a psychological safety net when the process inevitably becomes exhausting.
The source material highlights this beautifully with a group of female partners at the accounting firm Coopers & Lybrand. Initially, they just formed a standard professional study group to discuss the unique challenges of navigating their careers in a heavily male-dominated industry. But over time, the dynamic evolved into something much deeper and more powerful. It became a truly resonant space.
It evolved into a zone of profound psychological safety, where these high-powered executives could finally drop their corporate armor. They could shed the vital lies, be brutally honest about their imposter syndrome and their fears, give each other unvarnished, ego-free feedback, and actively support each other's learning agendas.
Without that kind of trusting relationship, whether it takes the form of an executive coach, a formal mentor, or a highly resonant peer group, lasting behavioral change is exceptionally rare. When your basal ganglia is fighting tooth and nail to drag you back to your old, comfortable, toxic habits, you need a tribe to hold you accountable to your ideal self.
All right, this is the pivot point. If I successfully do all of this, if I define my ideal self, strip away my vital lies, meticulously design a learning agenda, and successfully rewire my own basal ganglia to become a highly resonant leader, what happens when I walk into a boardroom full of 12 other executives who are all operating on the default right prefrontal cortex anxiety? Does my individual resonance even matter? How do we scale this neurology?
That is the exact bridging question that moves us into Section 4, the hive mind, which covers Chapter 9, the emotional reality of teams. And I need to introduce a major, somewhat jarring paradigm shift right here. Everything we just spent the last half hour discussing regarding how an individual fundamentally changes. You have to take that entire playbook and flip the script completely when you are dealing with a collective team.
Flip the script in what way? The neurology shouldn't change just because there are more people in the room, right?
The underlying neurology of the individuals doesn't change, but the mechanics of group motivation are entirely different. For an individual, we establish that metamorphosis must start with the ideal self, the first discovery. You desperately need that burst of left prefrontal hope to generate the energy required for the grueling work of hacking your habits. But for teams, starting the change process with the ideal self is almost universally a recipe for failure.
But wait, every corporate offsite I've ever heard of starts with a massive vision boarding session. The CEO stands up and paints a picture of the ideal future state of the company.
And that is exactly why the vast majority of corporate offsites fail to produce any measurable, lasting change in team behavior. Because a group's ideal vision, usually codified in a sanitized, focus-grouped corporate mission statement, is inherently too abstract, too distant, and too disconnected from the visceral daily friction of the actual work. It feels like corporate theater. It does not trigger the collective dopamine response required for a dozen different basal ganglia to change their routines.
It doesn't feel real.
Exactly. For a group, the motivation to fundamentally change how they operate doesn't come from a lofty vision statement. It comes from the shock of confronting the brutal, uncomfortable reality of their current dysfunction. The first discovery for a team is not the ideal, it is the real.
So for a team to actually change, they have to stare directly into the abyss of their own collective dysfunction first. They have to map their current emotional reality before they can even pretend to look at the horizon. This directly ties into the story from the book about the manufacturing firm that was locked in a prolonged period of what they politely called flat growth. It is a brilliant, terrifying example of the paralysis of nice.
The paralysis of nice, yes.
This executive team was highly educated, deeply experienced, and yet they could not make a strategic decision to save their lives. They would circle critical issues for months, hold incredibly polite, structured meetings, and then inevitably kick the can down the road, forming yet another subcommittee. Why? Because an external audit finally revealed their deeply hidden emotional reality. As a collective unit, they had a paralyzing terror of open conflict.
It was suffocating them. Every single member of that executive team scored abysmally low on the emotional intelligence competency of conflict management. Because they were all terrified of friction, they unconsciously created an invisible, unbreakable rule: never disagree openly.
The result was a culture of toxic politeness. They would sit in high-stakes strategy meetings, nod thoughtfully, fake total agreement with a flawed plan, and then walk out into the hallway and quietly, systematically sabotage the very decisions they had just pretended to support. The emotional reality of the team was entirely divorced from the operational reality of the business.
And that invisible, unspoken rule against open disagreement is what sociologists and organizational psychologists call a norm. Norms are the silent, incredibly powerful tribal laws that govern behavior in any specific group. They are the implicit learning of the collective hive mind. Norms dictate what feels right to the group and what behavior will be swiftly punished by the tribe. If a leader does not invest the time to understand the deep, historical norms of a team, they cannot possibly lead them effectively.
Which perfectly sets up the catastrophic, cautionary tale of Janet. Janet was a highly accomplished executive hired to turn around a deeply underperforming insurance division. She came in hot. She had a naturally commanding, pace-setting leadership style, a massive mandate for change from the board, and a ruthless focus on efficiency. When she arrived, she immediately started firing legacy employees who didn't instantly adapt to her rigorous new program. She assumed the rest of the team would fall in line at a mix of professional respect and sheer fear for their own jobs.
Her fatal flaw was that she was entirely, willfully blind to the invisible architecture of the team's existing norms.
Completely blind. What Janet failed to realize was that this sleepy, underperforming insurance division was held together by a core sacred norm, deep, unwavering, almost familial loyalty to one another. Over the years, they had built a culture that prided itself above all else on taking care of each other and saving face, even during hard times. It was their tribal religion. By aggressively firing legacy staff and treating the survivors roughly in meetings, Janet didn't just institute a new corporate policy. She essentially declared holy war on their deepest tribal values.
And as any anthropologist will tell you, the tribe always fights back to protect its norms.
Oh, they fought back with terrifying efficiency. The team actively coalesced against her. They formed a unified front of resistance, undermined her directives at every single turn, misplaced critical data, and essentially went on a covert, highly organized strike. Within a matter of months, Janet was ousted by upper management, and the division was performing so miserably that it had to be completely dismantled and sold off in parts. She ignored the emotional reality of the room, and that reality literally destroyed the team.
So we've seen the destructive power of toxic or misaligned norms. How do leaders deliberately build the opposite? How do we construct an emotionally intelligent team that leverages positive norms for high performance? The authors categorize team-level emotional intelligence into three main pillars: self-aware teams, self-managed teams, and empathic teams. Let's break these down with concrete examples, starting with the self-aware team.
I love the elegance of this specific example. There was a senior engineering leader running a highly technical weekly status meeting. Right in the middle of a complex presentation, one of the key team members comes storming into the room, clearly late, visibly agitated, and audibly muttering about how the time and location of the meeting were incredibly inconvenient and disruptive to his workflow.
Now, a low EI leader, or a pure pace setter, would likely ignore the outburst to stay on schedule.
Or worse, snap back, pull rank, and tell the engineer to sit down and be quiet, immediately flooding the room with toxic dissonance. But this leader did something entirely different. He stopped the meeting cold, he looked directly at the angry engineer, openly acknowledged the palpable radiating frustration in the room, and publicly thanked him for making the difficult sacrifice to be there, despite the severe inconvenience to his schedule.
Boom! Bomb entirely diffused.
Completely diffused.
Fuck.
By openly acknowledging and validating the emotional reality of the moment, by operating as a self-aware team, the engineer's anger instantly evaporated. His amygdala deactivated, his neocortex came back online, and the entire room could actually focus on the technical work at hand without the distraction of an unaddressed conflict.
It's the psychological equivalent of refusing to let the elephant in the room trample the agenda. You acknowledge the elephant, and then you get back to work. Now, moving to the second pillar, self-managed teams. This is the fascinating territory where a group actively, consciously polices its own norms to ensure collective resonance. The emotional intelligence researcher, Carrie Chernes, provides a brilliant mechanical example of this. Before he runs any meeting, he doesn't just hand out a standard agenda detailing what topics they are going to discuss. He explicitly prints out the process norms governing how they are going to interact.
Yes. He codifies the invisible rules. He prints out mandates like no side conversations while someone is presenting, we will ruthlessly respect time limits, and every single person in this room must voice an opinion before a final decision is locked. By taking the invisible implicit norms and making them highly visible and explicit, the team is empowered to hold itself accountable. It removes the burden of policing from the leader and distributes it to the hive mind.
It shifts the responsibility.
But my absolute favorite example of structural team self-management comes from an R&D lab that instituted a brilliant behavioral hack called the Angel's Advocate Rule. We are all deeply familiar with the devil's advocate dynamic, right? You are in a brainstorming session, someone pitches a fragile, brand new, highly innovative idea, and within 3 seconds, someone else jumps in to play the devil's advocate. They immediately point out all the logistical flaws, the budgetary constraints, and the immense risks.
And while analytical critique is eventually necessary, doing it at the moment of inception instantly deflates the creative energy in the room. Neurologically, it forces the entire group out of the visionary left prefrontal cortex and plunges them straight into the risk-averse right prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. It kills innovation in the crib. But this specific R&D lab completely re-engineered that norm. They instituted a hard, unbreakable rule. Whoever speaks immediately after a new idea is pitched to the group must play the role of the angel's advocate. They are required to spend a full 2 minutes vigorously defending the new idea, pointing out its brilliant potential, finding ways it could revolutionize their workflow, and actively adding value to it before anyone in the room is allowed to offer a single word of critique.
The neurological impact of that single rule is profound. It forces the collective brain of the team to reside in the left prefrontal cortex, demanding hope, exploration, and expansion before allowing critical analysis to enter the equation. It creates a temporary umbrella of psychological safety that allows fragile, potentially revolutionary innovation to actually take root and grow strong enough to withstand the eventual necessary critique.
It is an absolute structural game changer. I want everyone listening to imagine implementing the Angel's Advocate rule at their very next team brainstorming session. The shift in energy, the sheer volume of creative output would be tectonic.
And finally, we arrive at the third pillar, empathic teams. These are the rare, highly evolved teams that possess the capacity to look beyond their own immediate borders and read the emotional reality of the broader organizational ecosystem.
The book provides a masterful example of this with a manufacturing team. This specific unit was highly dependent on the plant's centralized maintenance team to quickly fix their frequently broken equipment so they could hit their aggressive production quotas. Historically, when machines broke, the standard interdepartmental dynamic was toxic. The manufacturing team would yell at the maintenance guys, complain to upper management about their slow response times, and breed massive resentment.
Classic silos.
But this emotionally intelligent manufacturing team flipped the script. They realized that yelling wasn't working. Instead, they sat down, collaborated, and wrote an incredibly detailed, glowing nomination for the maintenance team to win the entire plant's prestigious Team of the Quarter award. And because the nomination was so compelling, the maintenance team actually won.
The manufacturing team utilized systemic empathy. They correctly diagnosed that the maintenance crew felt chronically overworked, unseen, and underappreciated by the entire factory. By going out of their way to publicly validate them, they built a massive, unbreakable bridge of goodwill. And you can guess whose machines magically got fixed first from that day forward. It wasn't Machiavellian manipulation, it was applied systemic empathy. They elevated the emotional reality of the entire ecosystem, which made everyone more productive.
However, reading the emotional reality of a massive, complex ecosystem isn't always that overt or easy to spot. Often, a resident leader has to act like an emotional detective, reading incredibly subtle, nonverbal signals. The authors illustrate this with the brilliant concept of the parking lot barometer.
This is such a practical tool.
The visual is so incredibly clear. Imagine a massive European pharmaceutical giant plunging headfirst into a highly chaotic, badly managed corporate merger. One specific manager is desperately trying to figure out the actual ground-level emotional climate of her massive division. She doesn't send out a sterile, multi-page corporate survey that everyone will just lie on anyway. She simply stands at her window every afternoon and looks down at the employee parking lot.
Watching the behavior, not the rhetoric.
When the merger was first announced and the corporate messaging was all about synergy and global domination, that parking lot was packed with cars until 7 or 8 p.m. every night. People were energized, hopeful, and willingly putting in massive extra hours to build a new reality.
The initial dopamine hit of the vision.
But as the merger inevitably dragged on, hit severe bureaucratic delays, and leadership communication completely broke down, she simply watched the parking lot. She watched it start emptying earlier and earlier every single day. First, a mass exodus at 5 p.m., then 4:30. Then people were slipping out at 4:15. She didn't need a spreadsheet to tell her morale was collapsing. The emptying parking lot was a stark, undeniable visual manifestation of deep change fatigue and plummeting engagement.
It's the ultimate unfiltered metric.
I want you, the listener, to pause and think about your own team right now. If you couldn't look at a project management spreadsheet or a KPI dashboard, if you could only observe the physical habits of your coworkers, what is your team's barometer telling you today? When do the green active dots on Slack disappear? How fast do people slam the leave meeting button when the Zoom call is theoretically over? Are they lingering to chat or are they fleeing the digital room? That is your true emotional reality.
That is a phenomenal diagnostic question. And returning to the pharma merger, what is truly fascinating is that within that same chaotic macro environment, some micro pockets of the company remained highly productive and deeply engaged. Why? Because the specific leaders of those resilient teams didn't just ignore the chaos or blindly mandate positive thinking. They actively managed the emotional transition. They utilized a deeply countercultural practice. They held team closedowns.
This practice goes against every instinct of modern, hyper-aggressive corporate culture. Normally, when a team is being fundamentally restructured or a major project is killed, manager just rolls in and says, okay, the old way is dead. Here's your brand new org chart. Here are your new KPIs. Go out there and be aggressively excited about it.
Toxic positivity at its finest.
But these resonant leaders understood human psychology. They actually gathered the remnants of the old team together. They held a deliberate formal ritual to celebrate their past successes, recount their war stories, and crucially, they allowed the team the necessary psychological space to openly mourn the end of the old era.
They actively processed the collective grief before they ever demanded excitement for the new reality. They essentially cleared the emotional cache of the team, allowing them to start the new initiative without dragging the heavy baggage of unacknowledged loss.
If we pull back and connect this to the overarching theme of the book, it underscores a vital, unbreakable law of leadership. You cannot simply mandate enthusiasm. You cannot put a gun to a team's head and demand resonance. You have to meticulously construct the emotional conditions where enthusiasm can naturally arise, and sometimes creating those conditions requires the incredibly uncomfortable work of clearing away the negative emotional backlog first.
Which brings us perfectly to the final massive pitfall for leaders who are desperately trying to fix their broken teams. Let's call it the trap of the off-the-shelf team-building retreat. We have all seen this play out. A leadership team is deeply dysfunctional. They are constantly sniping at each other. They are missing all their strategic targets. So a panicked CEO says, I know how to fix this. We have a morale problem. Let's take everyone out to the woods for a weekend. Let's do trust falls. Let's lock the executive team in an escape room.
We're going to build a raft.
Right, and it is almost universally a spectacular failure because it attempts to treat a profound structural disease with a superficial symptom reliever. The source material details an incredible case study of a mid-sized company CEO who fell into this exact trap. He genuinely believed he just needed to organize a fun, bonding retreat for his incredibly fractured executive committee.
But thankfully, before they booked the ropes course, they brought in specialized coaches to do a deep analytical dive into the team's actual dynamics using a tool called the ECI.
Yes, the Emotional Competence Inventory. It is crucial to understand what the ECI is. It is not a personality quiz. It is a highly rigorous 360-degree assessment tool designed specifically to measure the specific emotional intelligence competencies of individuals within a corporate structure. It aggregates data from peers, subordinates, and superiors to provide an unvarnished map of emotional behavior.
And when the coaches ran the ECI on this executive committee, the data revealed a reality far darker and vastly more complex than a simple morale problem. They didn't need to learn how to trust each other in a forest. They had deeply embedded, highly toxic behavioral norms that were destroying the company. The aggregate data explicitly showed that they had one executive member who was incredibly aggressive, prone to rage, and completely lacking in any self-awareness. He was essentially acting as a relentless bully in every strategy meeting, terrifying the rest of the board.
And that wasn't even the only problem.
No. Simultaneously, they had another key member, a highly intelligent expat brought over from an overseas plant, who possessed great personal empathy, but was totally clinically blind to the complex political and cultural norms of the corporate headquarters. He was constantly accidentally stepping on massive political landmines. The most devastating finding, however, was that the team's overriding central norm had devolved into conflict avoidance. The rest of the executives were spending 90% of their daily cognitive energy just managing the emotional fallout from the bully and cleaning up the political messes of the expat rather than actually executing the company's strategy.
A weekend of playing laser tag or falling backward into each other's arms is not going to fix a politically blind expat, nor will it cure a narcissistic executive bully.
Exactly. They required a brutal, highly confrontational, data-driven emotional reality check. They needed to sit in a locked room, stare at the glaring ECI data projected on a screen, and have the courage to say, our operational norm is extreme avoidance. Our daily reality is deeply toxic. We have to fundamentally deconstruct and rebuild how we speak to each other in this room before we can ever hope to execute our strategic vision.
Oh, wow.
They didn't need a pizza party. They needed intense, localized surgical intervention on their tribal norms.
And initiating that level of intervention requires immense, almost unnatural courage from the leader. To formally open a dialogue about the unwritten rules, to point out the vital lies, and to dissect the toxic norms of a powerful executive team is to intentionally walk into a psychological minefield. But the foundational argument of primal leadership is absolute. If you, as the leader, do not actively manage the complex emotional reality of your team, I assure you, that emotional reality will silently and ruthlessly manage you.
Okay, We have been sprinting at an incredibly high velocity today. We have covered a staggering amount of psychological and neurological ground. Let's synthesize this dopaminergic sprint before our collective basal ganglia overheat and shut down. We started by sparking the left prefrontal cortex with the first discovery, the vital necessity of defining the ideal self, actively breaking out of Max Weber's restrictive iron cage of expectations, and generating the biological hope required to fuel the agonizing work of change.
From there, we stared directly into the brutal mirror of the second discovery. We analyzed the slow, creeping danger of the boiling frog syndrome, and we explored how to strip away Henrik Ibsen's vital lies curing the CEO disease so we could finally see our real self and explicitly identify the massive gaps in our behavior.
Having identified the gaps, we moved into the mechanics of the metamorphosis protocol. We examined why HR's traditional performance improvement plans trigger right prefrontal panic and why they must be replaced with hope-driven learning agendas tied directly to our deepest dreams. We learned how to turn our daily lives into sprawling laboratories for stealth learning, generalizing our skills across multiple environments.
And most importantly, we explored the arduous neurology of hacking the basal ganglia through intense mental rehearsal and repetitive practice to finally override our default toxic emotional responses.
And finally, we scaled that entire architecture up to the hive mind. We executed a complete paradigm shift, realizing that while individuals start with the ideal, teams must first confront the brutal truth of their real emotional dysfunction. We examined the invisible, powerful architecture of tribal norms, the genius of utilizing the angel's advocate rule for self-management, and the absolute counterintuitive necessity of processing collective grief before demanding excitement for the future.
It is an incredibly dense, comprehensive blueprint for both neurological and cultural transformation. But, as is our tradition, synthesizing the data isn't enough. This raises an important, deeply personal question, something I want you to actively process as you step away from this audio and back into the reality of your day. We've talked extensively about how to spot the internal, vital lies you tell yourself and how to identify the hidden psychological norms operating within your team. But I want you to shift your focus to the purely physical. I want you to look at your physical environment right now, the actual space around you.
The actual physical artifact.
Yes. Look at your digital calendar for the next 7 days. Look at the current state and categorization of your inbox. Look at the physical layout of your workspace, the specific books stacked on your desk, the arrangement of the apps on your phone's home screen. If a completely objective, highly trained anthropologist were to walk into your life right now, look exclusively at the physical artifacts of your daily routine, and analyze them without ever speaking to you, what unspoken emotional norm would they say you are silently, ruthlessly enforcing upon yourself? Are the physical objects, the meticulously scheduled meetings, and the daily rhythms you surround yourself with actively building a laboratory for stealth learning and continuous metamorphosis? Or are you, day by day, artifact by artifact, email by email, quietly reinforcing the steel bars of your own iron cage?
Oh, that is a remarkably heavy, incredibly clarifying question to leave off on. Look at the artifacts of your life. Every single one of them is either a tool for the laboratory or a bar for the cage. There's no neutral territory. Listen, if your brain feels like it is physically buzzing right now, if you feel slightly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what we've unpacked, that is a fantastic sign. That means the neuroplasticity is actively working. You are laying down new cables. We have successfully pushed through the dense theory of emotional intelligence. We have mastered the rigorous protocols of individual rewiring, and we have deciphered the complex emotional reality of team metamorphosis. But the mission isn't over. We have one final massive piece of this puzzle left to place. Next time, in the absolute finale of this 4-part mini-series, we are taking everything we've learned about the individual and the team, and we are scaling it to the ultimate macro level. We're going to examine the terrifying, exhilarating mechanics of how a single resonant leader can infect an entire, massive global organization with emotional intelligence. Until then, rigorously check your parking lot barometer, practice your stealth empathy on your family and your barista, and keep relentlessly looking for the ideal. We'll see you for the finale.
Welcome to the grand finale.
Yes, here
We are. This is the fourth and final part of our deep dive into the architecture of human leadership.
the culmination of the Primal Leadership blueprint.
Exactly. And if you have been with us for the first 3 parts of this journey, you know we've been intensely focused on the micro level.
The individual.
Right. We've spent hours hacking the individual human brain. We looked at how a single leader develops emotional intelligence, how they, rewire their own neural pathways through self-directed learning.
Which is incredibly hard work on its own.
Oh, massive work. And we mapped out how they navigate the different styles of leadership to trigger resonance within themselves and their immediate circle. We built the perfect emotionally intelligent leader in a laboratory setting.
A completely controlled environment.
Right. But today we are taking off the training wheels.
We are leaving the lab.
We are leaving the lab and scaling this up to the macro level. We're doing a relentless dopamine-fueled sprint from chapter 10 right through to the end of the text. No fluff.
Because the reality of business is that you are rarely, if ever, operating in a vacuum.
Never. The ultimate question we have to answer today is, how do you take a single spark of resonant leadership and use it to infect an entire corporate ecosystem?
It is arguably the most difficult challenge any leader will face, period. You can spend years perfecting your own emotional intelligence, mastering your self-awareness, learning how to manage your reactions.
All the stuff we talked about in parts 1 through 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you take that newly developed, highly resonant leader and you drop them into a fundamentally toxic system, they are going to struggle.
Yeah.
It's essentially like dropping a perfectly healthy fish into a poisoned tank.
Wow. Yes.
No matter how resilient the fish is, the environment is eventually going to dictate the outcome.
The water always wins.
The water always wins. So today is about draining the swamp. We are looking at how you map the true emotional reality of a large organization, how you shatter the hidden cultural norms that are suffocating your people, and how you build a self-sustaining machine of resonance.
A culture that actually outlasts any single executive. So listener, whether you are trying to shift the vibe of a scrappy 5-person startup operating out of the garage, or you've been tasked with turning around a massive, sluggish, multinational corporation grab-on tight.
This is the cinematic roadmap to architecting a reality.
It really is. And to start, I want to look at what happens when leaders are completely blind to the water they're swimming in. The source material brings up this visceral case study involving the Shoney's restaurant chain.
Yes, the Shoney's disaster.
Disaster is the right word. I was reading through this, and it paints a picture of an executive team operating in total, absolute denial.
Complete insulation.
Right. It was a closed-door, old boys network,
Yeah.
white, male senior executives, a massive culture of cronyism. What exactly happened there? How do you get so detached from reality without realizing it?
Well, the Shoney's example perfectly demonstrates the danger of unexamined corporate norms. For a long time, they had this very tight-knit group at the very top. They shared a long history, similar backgrounds, and they operated as a closed loop.
They only promoted their buddies.
Exactly. They relied heavily on a buddy system that systematically excluded people of color, women, anyone who didn't fit their specific rigid demographic mold.
But the wild thing is...
The psychological mechanism.
Yeah,
You know-
the psychological mechanism. Group norms are these tacit, unspoken rules. You don't get a handbook on day one that says, hey, we only promote people who look like us.
Right, you just observe who gets promoted, who gets invited to the golf outings, who gets listened to in meetings.
Over time, that becomes the invisible reality. It becomes the air they breathe. But the executives inside that bubble genuinely thought they were running a great company. They didn't wake up every morning trying to be evil villains.
No, they were just comfortably numb to their own biases.
The text refers to this as the boiling frog syndrome. They were sitting in a pot of water, the temperature was slowly rising, and they had absolutely no idea they were boiling alive.
Until it was too late. Toxic norms they operate much like carbon monoxide in a house.
Invisible but deadly.
Completely deadly over time. Leaders often inherit these tribal subterranean habits and just accept them as the way things are done around here. At Shoney's, it took a catastrophic, undeniable lawsuit to finally shatter that inertia.
A massive external shock.
They needed a legal intervention to force them to look at the reality of their own culture. You simply cannot fix what you refuse to acknowledge.
But it's not always as blatantly destructive as a massive lawsuit, right? Sometimes the blind spot is just a total disconnect between good intentions at the top and the reality on the ground floor.
The research hospital example?
Yes, the large research hospital mentioned in the text. The leadership there wasn't malicious. They actually thought they were pushing a state-of-the-art progressive change agenda.
But they kept hitting a massive wall of resistance.
Exactly. Why were their brilliant plans failing so spectacularly?
That hospital is a perfect example of how top-down mandates collapse when they ignored the emotional bedrock of the organization. They drafted this visionary plan to modernize practices, encourage innovation,
Rolled it out with all the corporate fanfare.
and the staff responded with sheer exhausting inertia. They dragged their feet. They found reasons why the new procedures wouldn't work. The initiative stalled completely,
The leadership must have been furious.
baffled and frustrated. But they finally realized they had to stop dictating the vision and start actually listening. When they dug into the emotional reality of the staff, they uncovered a massive disconnect.
What was it?
The staff fundamentally did not believe that the culture supported real change or risk-taking.
Because in a hospital, in medicine, mistakes literally have life or death consequences.
Precisely. The stated vision from leadership was innovate and take risks. The unstated lived reality of the culture was keep your head down, follow the old rules, and do not make a mistake or your career is over.
Wow.
The leaders had entirely missed this subterranean fear. They were asking their people to sprint on a floor covered in ice and then getting mad when nobody wanted to run.
Which brings up a huge logistical problem for anyone listening to this who runs a company. How do you actually measure that subterranean fear? Because the standard corporate playbook says, I should just, send out an anonymous employee satisfaction survey.
Which the source material is highly critical of.
Right. It essentially argues they are useless for diagnosing cultural sickness. Why is a standard 1 to 5 scale survey inadequate here?
Because standard surveys suffer from a profound find what you look for bias. The leadership designs the questions based on what they already think is important, or worse, what they are comfortable hearing.
Right, like rate the quality of the cafeteria food from 1 to 5.
Exactly. You are completely missing the emotional undercurrents. A survey is like checking a patient's temperature with a broken thermometer that has been hardwired to never read above 98 degrees.
It tells you the temperature is fine while the patient is actively burning up with a fever.
You cannot capture fear, resentment, or a lack of psychological safety by asking someone to strongly agree or strongly disagree with a sanitized corporate statement.
So if the standard survey is a broken thermometer, what is the emotional MRI? The text introduces a methodology called dynamic inquiry, developed by Cecilia McMillan and Annie McKee.
It's much more rigorous.
If I'm a leader, how do I actually execute this? I assume I'm not just sending out a different kind of web link.
No, dynamic inquiry requires you to step away from the keyboard and engage in highly structured, deeply human interactions.
Yeah.
It begins by identifying both the formal leaders,
The people with the titles.
right, and the informal leaders, the people who actually hold sway over the water cooler conversations. You bring these individuals into open-ended, deep conversations. You ask them very simple but profound questions.
Like what?
What is actually helping you succeed here? What is genuinely getting in your way? You aren't giving them multiple choice options. You are letting them articulate the reality of their daily experience in their own words.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I pull my staff into a room and ask them what's getting in their way, doesn't that just immediately devolve into a massive, unproductive complaint session?
That is a very valid concern.
How do you prevent it from just becoming an hour of people venting about their manager's tone or the lack of parking?
That's why the role of the facilitator is critical. It is not a free-for-all venting session. The facilitator is actively listening for underlying themes. If people are complaining about parking, the facilitator digs deeper.
To see if the real issue is, say, a feeling that management doesn't respect their time.
Or that there's a strict hierarchy where executives get special treatment while the front line struggles. You take the raw data of their frustrations and distill it into meaningful cultural themes.
And then what?
Then you take those distilled themes back to larger groups of employees and use them to spark spirited, constructive dialogues. You are essentially taking the covert whispers, the things people only say in the parking lot after work, and making them overt.
You create a shared language.
You give the entire organization a shared vocabulary to describe their actual reality. When people finally hear their true frustrations validated openly, it releases an immense amount of trapped defensive energy.
But once you release that energy, you have to actually do something with it. Uncovering the truth is useless unless you act on it. If you ask people to be vulnerable and tell you the truth and then you do nothing, you destroy whatever trust you had left.
Absolutely.
The source brings up Lang Chen, who ran an IT division. She didn't just hold a town hall and ask everyone to be nicer. She realized you have to wire the organization's circulatory system to support the cure.
Lang Chen is a brilliant example of connecting emotional intelligence to structural engineering.
Yeah.
She used dynamic inquiry to uncover what was stifling collaboration. And then she went in and completely re-engineered the hard systems.
The HR system.
She changed the recruiting criteria to actively screen for emotional intelligence, not just technical coding skills.
Yeah.
She overhauled the performance management and appraisal systems.
Because if you stand on a stage and say, we need to be a highly collaborative family, but your bonus structure only rewards cut-through individualistic behavior.
Your words mean absolutely nothing.
The structure dictates the behavior. She made sure resonance was structurally rewarded. And that transition from the hard metrics of business to the emotional reality of leadership brings us to one of the most cinematic stories in the entire text.
Anthony Bergman's at Unilever.
Yes. The 3 a.m. panic, the hour of the rat. Let's paint this picture. It's deep in the night. Anthony Bergman's the co-chairman of Unilever, is lying awake. And on paper, Unilever is flawless at this exact moment.
Pristine.
They have a brilliant corporate strategy, shareholder support, top-tier talent in every position. By every traditional metric, he should be sleeping like a baby. But he's lying there in a panic, consumed by this profound sense that something is fundamentally wrong.
He realized that despite the perfect spreadsheets, the strategy was doomed.
What's fascinating here is his reaction to that panic. Most executives would just dismiss that 3 a.m. anxiety as stress or bad takeout.
They would look at the data, tell themselves everything was fine, and go back to sleep.
But he didn't.
Because emotionally intelligent leaders use their own internal dissonance as a highly sensitive data instrument. Gut feelings are data.
I love that. Gut feelings are data. Let's break down the biology of that because it sounds almost mystical. Why is a feeling in your stomach a valid indicator of corporate strategy?
It comes down to the architecture of our nervous system. The amygdala, the brain's emotional sentinel, processes information incredibly fast, much faster than our rational neocortex.
Right.
It scans our environment for patterns. When it detects a discrepancy, it doesn't always have the time or the neural pathways to send the complex, articulated thought to your conscious mind. Instead, it communicates through the vagus nerve,
Which runs from the brainstem all the way down into the abdomen.
connecting directly to the enteric nervous system,
Yeah.
our second brain.
So when his amygdala sensed that something was wrong with the strategy, maybe subtle behavioral patterns in his executive team suggesting they weren't really committed,
It sent a rapid signal down the vagus nerve. That signal literally alters the motility and blood flow in your gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah.
Your stomach drops. You get a knot in your gut.
His rational brain was looking at perfect spreadsheets, but his amygdala was screaming red alert.
He realized in that moment that without a fundamentally new culture and new behaviors, their pristine strategy was dead on arrival.
That biological reality perfectly frames a massive distinction the source material makes. The difference between alignment and attunement.
A crucial paradigm shift.
We need to dissect this. Alignment is a word that corporate jargon has beaten to death. Every manager wants to know if the team is aligned, but the text argues alignment is entirely insufficient. Let's use the analogy.
Alignment is mechanical. It's like taking a handful of pencils and forcing them to all point in the exact same direction on a desk.
It speaks to the neocortex, dry, linear corporate goals.
It's about forced compliance. You can align an organization through mandates and compensation plans, but it completely bypasses the heart.
So what is attunement?
Attunement is a symphony. It's taking a room full of tuning forks and getting them to vibrate at the exact same frequency. It speaks directly to the limbic system, sparking actual passion and heat.
When you strike a tuning fork, the other forks naturally begin to vibrate in sympathy.
Exactly. When a leader creates attunement, they broadcast a vision so authentically that the people naturally begin to resonate with it. They feel the invisible threads binding them together.
It's the difference between forcing compliance and touching hearts. So how do you actually do that in the real world? Let's rapid fire some case studies. Keki Dedaseth at Hindustan Lever Limited.
He took over a bureaucratic, closed-door company in India.
Very rigid hierarchy, a massive managing up mindset where everyone just tries to guess what the boss wants.
So he literally moved his office to a different floor.
Embedded himself right where the actual work was happening.
He adopted an extreme open-door policy. He made himself so visible and transparent that the old habits of maneuvering became obsolete. He modeled the change so viscerally that his people couldn't help but emulate it.
He attuned them by vibrating at a new frequency himself. But what about when the work itself has lost meaning? Monica Sharma at UNICEF.
A totally different challenge.
She was fighting child and maternal mortality, a secret mission. But her staff, the bureaucrats in Geneva and New York, were completely burned out, buried in paperwork.
Experiencing profound dissonance.
So she didn't just give them a pep talk or a bonus, she took them out into the field.
She literally transported the bureaucrats out of their offices and forced them to look directly into the eyes of the mothers and children they were serving.
She reconnected the daily grind to the sacred mission, bypassed the neocortex, and hit the limbic system hard. And then there's Judith Rodin and John Fry at the University of Pennsylvania.
Attuning with the external community.
UPenn was in a financial crisis. They needed to make painful internal cuts. But instead of just dropping the hammer, they championed a massive, expensive cleanup of West Philadelphia.
Which seems counterintuitive. Why fix the neighborhood when your own house is on fire?
Right. But by championing the community, they proved their integrity.
They show they actually cared about human well-being. That external action built an immense reservoir of internal trust. When the hard internal changes came, the staff trusted their motives.
Okay, so we understand the difference between alignment and attunement. But if I'm a leader, I need the sequence of operations, the blueprint for scale.
The rules of engagement for the resident tribe.
Yes. Rule 1, discovering the emotional reality. And the first subdirective is respect the sacred center. What is that?
The sacred center is the cultural DNA. The core values and historical pride the tribe holds is paramount.
Before you change anything, you have to figure out what they hold sacred. Because if you come in and try to destroy it, you trigger an immune response. They will reject you as a foreign body.
Exactly. Which ties into the second part. Slow down to speed up.
The target shooting coach analogy. If you're in a combat situation, you can't miss fast enough to save your life.
It is brilliant. When leaders feel pressure, their instinct is the shotgun approach. Coming guns blazing, restructure overnight.
It always fails. It just creates panic.
Resident leaders use coaching and democratic styles to build consensus slowly. You must build consensus slowly so the actual execution can be lightning fast.
And the final piece of Rule 1, top-down meets bottom-up. Mandates have to come from the top. The CEO has to get the air cover. But residents only catches fire when the informal leaders at the bottom jumpstart the enthusiasm.
If the informal leaders don't buy in, the mandate is dead.
Rule 2, visualizing the ideal. The mandate here is look inside and people first. Strategy is secondary to people.
Emotional bonds are the soil where resonance grows.
To translate that, if your people don't share a dream, your rigorous 5-year plan is just expensive toilet paper. You have to bond them first.
And then you hit Rule 3, sustaining emotional intelligence. This is where it gets fascinating. Manage the myths and legends.
I love this concept. Organizations survive on legends, the stories told at the water cooler.
A resident leader deliberately manages these myths. They use small, highly visible symbolic gestures to create new legends that reinforce emotional intelligence.
Like a CEO taking a pay cut to save jobs on the floor during a crisis. That story gets told for a decade. You are deliberately scripting the folklore of your own resident tribe.
Which leads us to the math of survival. Epidemic resonance.
The end of the program.
An organization's survival comes down to its ratio of resonance to dissonance. To permanently tip that scale, you need a dispersed cadre of leaders. One charismatic CEO isn't enough.
Which is why we need to aggressively unpack why standard leadership development programs are complete garbage.
They really are.
We all know the drill. You take a mid-level manager, send them to a fancy resort for 3 days, they do some trust falls, get a binder full of buzzwords, feel great, and then Monday morning they walk back into the exact same toxic system.
The system actively fights the new behavior.
The culture has crushing inertia. You cannot change the individual without changing the group norms. It's the fish in the poison tank again. The fish dies.
That is why the source champions the process over the program, specifically action learning.
The U.S. Telecom VP anecdote. He spent hundreds of thousands on a program for women and people of color. At the final presentation, he was utterly stunned to see 20 leaders pitching highly viable, massive, strategic solutions to the company's biggest problems.
He had no idea the talent was buried in his company.
Because it wasn't role play. It was action learning. Let's break down the rules of why this works.
Rule 1. It must address real, critical business problems. No hypothetical case studies.
Rule 2. It must be highly visible to senior leadership.
And Rule 3, which is crucial. People must be released from their normal duties to actually do it.
Right. You can't just tell someone to solve the supply chain crisis, but also hit their weekly sales quotas. You have to give them the space. It's the difference between hitting a punching bag in your garage, which is standard training, and sparring with a live opponent in the ring.
Action learning is sparring. You take a hit, you adapt.
So how do we make people want to get into the ring? The Costa Rica effect. Wiring the hive mind.
Creating the buzz.
The selection paradox. The process must be elite. Only the best get in, but universally accessible. Everyone feels they have a fair chance to earn a spot.
It creates a powerful aspirational pull.
And once you have that elite cohort, you do what Unilever did. Chairman Niall Fitzgerald and Anthony Bergmans took their top 100 leaders to a secret location in Costa Rica.
An intense physical and emotional journey in the jungle.
They stripped away the corporate armor, forced them to share failures, regrets, dreams, built authentic trust. And when they returned, the phrase Costa Rica became a literal password.
If someone started playing toxic politics in a boardroom, someone else would just say, Costa Rica.
And it instantly shattered the posturing. But the genius is they didn't stop there.
No, they cascaded down to the next 500 leaders and then mirrored it down through the business units, a holistic system permeating every layer.
But if you don't have the budget for a jungle retreat, you look at Linda Pittari at Merrill Lynch.
She mapped the cultural boxes.
She used dynamic inquiry to find out what was actually rewarded and punished. And then she aligned the HR systems with the real culture.
And 40% of the participants got promoted.
Yeah.
She maximized the half-life of learning by designing for culture, competencies, and spirit all at once.
Which brings us to the grand finale, the final evolution. We are shattering the old mold today. The old school, command and control, captains of industry.
The dictators.
They are dinosaurs staring at an asteroid.
Because future business realities are entirely unpredictable. The text uses the example of an info services CEO who realized the data he was selling today for millions would be free on the internet tomorrow.
The entire business model was guaranteed to break.
When the model breaks, the only thing that holds the company together is the emotional resilience and passion of its people.
The future belongs to the resident. And that brings it all back to you, the listener. You have the blueprint now. You understand the brain, the styles, the self-directed learning, and the cultural scaling.
You have all the tools.
So we want to leave you with one final provocative twist from the text.
We talked about managing the myths and legends of your organization. If resonance spreads like a virus, and you are patient zero in your own sphere of influence.
What dormant, toxic myths are you currently propagating without even realizing it?
And more importantly, what is the new legend you are going to script when you walk through those doors tomorrow morning?
That is the ultimate question. It has been an absolute honor taking this monumental 4-part journey into the primal core of leadership with you. Thank you for diving deep. Stay curious, stay resonant, and keep architecting reality.